Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and this video we're going back to the Overlook. So The Shining is one of my favourite films of all time, and I think Doctor Sleep is also an excellent sequel. Throughout this breakdown, we'll be going through both the films and talking about all the things you might have missed. We'll also be going through the books as well, and this will be your ultimate breakdown on both movies. If you enjoyed, please hit the thumbs up and check out our merch store below where we've got 2 Kubrick inspired shirts. There we've got our Death Stare and also our Red Rum one as well, and lots of big discounts for you guys at home. That out of the way though, thank you for clicking this. Now let's get into The Shining. Okay, so The Shining is a film that's stuck with me since the first second I saw it. I vividly remember watching it when I was about 8 years old, and then the long night of nightmares that followed. Though Stephen King famously disliked the film, I think it's inarguable at this point that this is one of the best movies of all time. Few of the directors have a body of work as iconic as Stanley Kubrick, and this film's probably filled with his most famous moments.
Here's Johnny!
Although it's a movie that we've broken down before, it's a film I've wanted to revisit for a while. When we made that first one, I didn't reread the book, and thus my notes on that were pretty patchy. However, for this, I've gone back to the original work and was also lucky enough to see the movie's recent IMAX release. I've also studied the conspiracy theories from Room 237 and uncovered the original plans for the alternate endings. So hopefully you enjoy this retread through film's most iconic horror as we go even more in depth than we did last time. Out of the way, thank you for clicking this. Now let's get into The Shining.
Come play with us, Daddy.
Okay, so it's difficult to talk about The Shining without first discussing the work that it's based on. King came up with the idea for the book when visiting the Stanley Hotel out in Estes Park, Colorado. He and his wife booked it for October 30th, which I'm guessing would have already stirred up ghost stories due to its proximity to Halloween.
Our season here runs from May 15th to October 30th.
For the Stanley though, this was a crucial night in their calendar, and it was the day before it was about to close for the season. He and his wife were the only guests there, and King spent the night wandering the hallways. They were long, seemingly never-ending and maze-like, with every corridor looking like the last. King's imagination ran wild, and he got swept up in just how creepy a place like this could be if it wasn't teeming with guests. The labyrinthian feel is also something Kubrick plays upon to great effect, with the crew building the entire hotel that we see in the film. This was deliberately built to be an impossible location in which the layout just doesn't make sense. Most of the rooms overlap, and there's several doorways and windows that actually lead to nothing. Subliminally, this seeps into our minds, and without knowing it, we just feel that something's off. Rob Eger's done several fantastic videos on the film in which he basically outlined how the layout's deliberately meant to confuse us. Several years ago, people in the modding community, they actually tried to rebuild the Overlook in a Duke Nukem map. However, they ran into a little bit of a snag. They found that when trying to recreate it, they just couldn't do it without breaking the layout itself. For example, Rob pointed out that just before Jack walks into Mr. Ullman's office, how we can see there's a large hallway that runs down the back behind him. However, upon entering it, we can see that there's a window directly behind Ullman's chair that shows trees. Due to the corridor being right behind the office, we know that this view simply can't exist. There's also the bike ride that Danny takes just after the Tuesday chapter card pops up. As we see, this all takes place on the second floor, which we know because Danny rides past the balcony twice. On the journey, we can see into the main hall, so there's no way that this isn't him upstairs. As we start, we have the elevator shaft on the left and then an open door with a set of stairs on the right. We then follow Danny up the corridor and watch as he turns left. On the right, we can see another set of elevator doors, and these link to the ones in the main hall just below this, which we see in later shots. Unfortunately for your brain though, that makes the previous pair impossible. The wall where the elevator should be is actually the wall in the hall that has the Native American art on it. The elevator behind it simply wouldn't fit, and that open stairwell would also lead to nowhere. Now, let's go back to those elevator doors next to the balcony. As Danny continues to ride, we see that on the left there's a place to look out over the main hall. As we follow Danny, he turns right and then right again, and this time we can catch him riding past the balcony once more. This is impossible and would mean that he's turned back on himself and would be above the Colorado lounge. Also, look at the thickness of the wall just beside the balcony. We can see that it's about 1.5 meters wide, and yet down the hallway we see several doors lining that side. They're leading to rooms that simply aren't there. Now this corridor also contains room 237. Later on when Danny approaches this, we can see the doors to the other rooms lining the wall. However, when we go into room 237, we can see how big it is. We know that these doors don't actually lead anywhere as they back onto the room itself. When Ullman's showing the Torrances around just before they get to their room, we can also see a door down the back and one to the right. Due to where the bedroom and bathroom are, we know this doesn't lead anywhere, and the window outside that leads to the snow slide also shows that the door down the bottom of the corridor doesn't go anywhere either. Does that make sense? Something just feels off about the hotel, and these things all add to its mystique. Again, definitely go check out Rob Eggers' channel if you haven't, as he's done by far the best breakdowns on this film and really doesn't get the credit he deserves. And I cannot recommend them highly enough, so yeah, go check them out. Now, beyond the layout being so discombobulating, there's also the fact that it's so brightly lit. Off the top of your head, you know, if you think of a scene in a horror movie, I bet it's dark in a small cramped room with a character shot quite close up. Juxtaposing this, the Shining's halls are massive and you're able to see everything, and there's never really anything that's hiding in the shadows. There's no horrors out there that look like this, and even by design that makes it feel unnatural. There's also the fact that every room in the hotel feels different. We never really get a sense of place, and because of this we never know what the characters will be walking into next. Kubrick also said he wanted the hotel to look authentic rather than a traditionally spooky movie hotel, or something they do in the Conjuring movies where everything looks scary and you would never move in there. But yeah, the design is perfect, and the hotel's labyrinthian layout and huge rooms, they were designed so that they alone would provide an eerie enough atmosphere. Beyond the hotel, we also have the characters, and yeah, something kind of feels off about them too. Outside of the outside of the correcting the family, and my kids are screaming in the background right now, and I might go and correct them as well. But yeah, a lot of the dialogue scenes feel very, very sterile. There's long one-take shots and close-ups, characters centered in the middle, and there's quite an uneasy feeling like you're staring at them too long, and they're staring back. You kind of want to break eye contact, and yeah, it just makes you feel uncomfortable watching the movie. In general as well, the complexities of a family stuck in a situation like this are just not explored that much in film. Now this of course builds off the back of the book, and King has explained that a lot of it was autobiographical. He was both an alcoholic and also had anger issues that affected his family life. Now this is no doubt why I dislike Kubrick's take, as most of Jack's motivations and stories are taken out. This is probably something that would have cut deep, as the author would have poured a lot of his soul into the writing. And yeah, he wasn't kind about the movie on its release, which led to him making a TV adaptation of it, which we might do if we get a lot of comments, but I kind of just want to skip straight to Dr. Sleep. When it comes to this story though, the idea of The Shining comes from the John Lennon song Instant Coma. This gave King the idea that people imprint on something and shine long after they're gone, and this is what the Overlook embodies. It's seemingly filled with the souls of those that it's trapped along the way. Traumatic events leave longer lasting impressions, and this is why it's teeming with all sorts of evil spirits. The Overlook itself is somewhat of its own malevolent entity, and it's very much alive. If you've ever been somewhere where a great atrocity's taken place, like a concentration camp or something, then you can feel that there's something in the air unsettling. You can't really put it into words, but it's there, just imprinted in the area. This is what the Overlook has, and due to this, it's become a place that embodies evil. It absorbs psychic energy and thus sees an amazing meal when it comes to the Torrances. In Dr. Sleep, Danny comes across his father working as a bartender the same age as the day he died. He's been absorbed and then taken to the future and forced to act out the hotel's will. There's even a section in the book that talks about this absorption thing, and happens when Dick drives away from the hotel, leaving them, and he looks back at the family. Abruptly, he started the car and put it in gear and drove away, trying to not look back. And of course he did. And of course the porch was empty. They'd gone inside. It was as if the Overlook had swallowed them. Now, Danny is obviously psychic, however, I also believe that Jack is as well. I think that the hotel is obviously after the kid, but it kind of sees Jack and Danny as a starter and a main, or an appetizer as they say in America, I believe. Now in Dr. Sleep and Welcome to Derry, we've seen our characters dull their shine by drinking alcohol. I feel like having the shine's what made Jack an alcoholic, and he did it as a way to quiet the voices. However, at the hotel, he's forced to be sober, and this is when he starts to see the ghosts. The book tells us from Danny's thoughts that he also used to point things out, however, this just led to questions, and so he learned to keep quiet. I think in hindsight, this also explains why Jack didn't lose his shit after going into room 237. He returns to Wendy and just says there was nothing there, even though we've all just seen what he witnessed in the bathroom. And it was fucking weird. And sexy. He also sees the ghosts as well, and acts like Lloyd's just a regular bartender. The best one as well. Knowing what we know about Danny's life, it's clear this creates a generational trauma and that seeing spirits leads to you hitting the spirits. Thank you. I even wonder if Jack's also been secretly drinking due to a line that we get in the movie. So maybe he's been drinking in secret. Now, we will discuss whether the ghosts are even real later on, but taken at face value, I think Jack was the easiest to manipulate, and this is why the hotel sought him out. The hotel then wanted Jack to kill Danny, and this was so it could take his immense power. Jack says he hit Danny 3 years ago, which is when he promised to stop drinking. However, he also says,
"Here's to 5 miserable months on the wagon."
This implies that he kept drinking, and it was only his time in the hotel that completely cut him off from it. Makes sense when you think about it too, as Jack only started to see the ghosts deep into the winter. By this time, he was completely away from alcohol, and this likely woke up his senses. Jack is also an unreliable narrator, and the movie misses out major parts of his drunken escapades. In the book, he broke Danny's arm, and the text describes in great detail him going through the attack. Like, I had a chill down my spine reading it, and King describes it as being like a loud snap and then just utter silence that fills the room. Now, Jack did this because Danny spilled his manuscript papers, and we learn that he also beat a student named George Hatfield. Jack used to be a teacher, and like all teachers, he had some unruly students who didn't hit the thumbs up. Hatfield was caught slashing his tires, and Jack lost his temper and brutally beat him. He was then fired, but even this didn't sober him up. Danny at one point even discusses how he can read the word divorce on his mother's brain, but he doesn't know what it truly means. Just that it's bad. Wendy's had enough though, and even before breaking Danny's arm, she thought about leaving him. A quote that's always stuck with me is how she had never known there was a life full of so much pain where there was nothing physically wrong. So yeah, she's getting ready to go, but then all of a sudden, Jack stops drinking, yay! Wendy's been praying for this miracle, and though it's strange, she doesn't really want to question it. There's definitely the suspicion though that something bad's happened, and Danny even woke up asking if his father had an accident. Now, we see things from Jack's point of view as well, and learn that he had a drinking buddy he used to go out with. The pair were driving while heavily drunk, and they thought they'd run over a kid. They got out of the car and found a bike in the middle of the road and then spent 2 hours searching for a body. Eventually they left, and Jack spent weeks wondering if the police would show up or he'd see something in the papers. However, nothing ever came, and eventually Jack viewed this as a second chance. So he gave up drinking and just went completely cold turkey. I think the bike's just some amazing foreshadowing, and I love the mental image of it just being framed in the road but the kids never found. This plays into the story later, and Danny of course constantly rides his bike. Jack tries to kill him, and eventually Danny manages to escape. In the end, we don't really know what happens to Jack, but we get that haunting photo of him on the wall from the July 4th ball in 1921. Bringing this photo up in full, we can see that he's doing a pose with his right arm angled upward and his left arm pointing down. This actually has links to Baphomet, who is often posed doing the exact same thing. I talked about this a lot more in our previous video, but later on we will discuss the original photo. Now, when talking about the image itself, Kubrick suggested this could hint at there being reincarnation within the hotel. Welcome to Derry also touches upon this and how an ultimate evil isn't forced to view time the same way that we do. Everything can be viewed as almost a fourth dimension that one can move through. Thus, entities with this higher understanding are able to view and navigate through time both forwards and backwards. Much in the same way, we can take a step forwards or backwards and move somewhere. These beings can move forwards and backwards through time. Thus, when it absorbs someone, they are always with the hotel, both in the past, present, and future. It's even possible it sends these souls back out to be reborn so they can have children and then bring them to the hotel to be absorbed. And the film seems to suggest that. The most notable of these things happens when we hear the story of Charles Grady. He corrected his kids with an axe, and it's something that Jack tries to repeat.
Hired a man named Charles Grady as the winter caretaker.
Now, the important things to keep in mind are the name Charles Grady and the fact that his daughters were 8 and 10. We of course seem to meet these as they terrify Danny, but these are clearly twins who aren't different ages. Later on in the bathroom, we also meet a man going by Grady who killed his family with an axe. But he clearly says his name's Delbert. Now, this could show that there's 2 Gradys at the hotel who murdered their families and that they were reincarnations of each other. In the time between them dying and then having to grow up, the other one could have filled in and continued the cycle. Add Jack to the mix and you have 2 people moving through cycles and bring their families to the Overlook to kill them. This would also explain the line,
"You've always been the caretaker."
And it would also explain why Jack says he feels like he has deja vu. There's also the idea that the twins went to Danny to stay forever and ever and ever.
Forever and ever and ever.
And And when crafting the novel, King said that time doesn't really exist in the hotel, and this is how all the different decades happen at the exact same time. On top of this, there was an alternate ending that contained a deleted scene that changed the way the movie played out. Danny and Wendy were in a hospital and they were visited by Mr. Ullman. He said that none of the skeletons or rivers of blood were there, and that when they inspected the hotel, everything was fine. It was great. 5 stars on TripAdvisor. However, he does give Danny a tennis ball, which is the same one that rolled towards him from room 237. Not mentioned in the film, as well as the fact that Grady was also an alcoholic. He went mad, just like Jack does in the book and movie. However, in the book, Mr. Ullman didn't want to hire Mr. Torrance at all because of these past fears around alcohol. He actually feared that something like this would happen again, and the fact that we have this repetition could indeed play into that. Now, the name Overlook has its own secret meaning. Though it can be taken as meaning that it's overlooking the mountain range, it can also be taken as meaning to overlook something. We as the audience aren't seeing what's really going on there, and there's also the idea that something in the hotel's looking over those inside. There's definitely a voyeuristic sense to the film, and at points, we even stalk the characters. Stanley Kubrick used a Steadicam technique throughout the film, which was a revolutionary way of filming at the time. It allows you to follow the characters through the hotel, and we get shots like this at several points. Kubrick mentioned that the camera work following Danny around was also similar to that used in The Maze, and he repeats these motifs to build that sense of dread. Overall, I think it's just one of those films that's kind of soaked into the zeitgeist, and it's probably a movie that even those who haven't seen it know the ins and outs of. Like a lot of millennials, I think, first became aware of it because of the shinning in The Simpsons. For as iconic as the film is, though, Kubrick actually took it on at a low point in his career. After 1975's Barry Lyndon didn't make much money in the US, Kubrick decided he needed to make a commercially viable film. Everyone wanted him to adapt their work, but he couldn't really find a piece that spoke to him. However, he was then gripped by The Shining's manuscript. It also helped that the adaptation of Carrie in 1976 was a smash hit, so moviegoers were familiar with King's name. Unfortunately, even though he tried to make a commercially viable film, at the time, this movie wasn't met with good reviews. Since then, it's obviously gone on to be appreciated, but yeah, at the time, got slammed a lot by the critics. And to make things worse, one of the most vocal critics was Stephen King. When adapting the novel, Kubrick said The Shining isn't exactly a literary masterpiece, and it's from here that their uneasy rivalry kind of started. Now, the majority of Kubrick's work adapted novels, and these often had mixed reception. However, he was often able to take the elements and craft them into something new. I love the book, to be honest, but this first shot from Kubrick didn't start them off on good footing. Upon release, King said he didn't really like the movie, though over time he has come to appreciate it. However, he did bring his own version to life in 1997 on TV, which was the shit one. Oh, the true one, sorry. King also wrote the first draft only for Kubrick to throw it out, so you can see how he might take a personal dislike to him. King actually had it in his contract that he had to create the first draft for his films, but yeah, Kubrick didn't really care. Things Kubrick added included the twin girls, who are some of the most creepiest characters. There's also thought to be a little dig at the author, though I have to stress people might just be reading into it. However, on Dick's long journey to the Overlook, he passes a crash site which has a red beetle totaled at the side of the road. Though the family drive a yellow one in the movie, the book specifically spells out it's red, rum. So many have read this shot as Kubrick basically throwing a shot and showing King what he thinks of his draft. The shot doesn't really do anything, there's no reason for it to be read, so that's why people have jumped on to it, but it just could all be a coincidence. If you've ever seen the documentary on the film though, Room 237, then you'll know there was a lot of conspiracy theories surrounding it. This covers things like Kubrick being the guy who faked the moon landing, the movie being a metaphor for the genocide of Native Americans, and even the Holocaust. I think with The Shining that some of these ideas can definitely be found here, but they're incomplete and thus never fully formed. Because of this, people can grasp at them and run off with their imaginations and basically create a Stranger Things conformity gate situation. However, this is another reason why people are still talking about the movie. According to the Now Playing podcast, when Tom Cruise was making Eyes Wide Shut, he would see Kubrick still editing The Shining in his spare time. To me, that says the movie was never really finished to the level that Kubrick wanted, and there's even different versions of the film out there. For years, us Brits had a cut down one that, to be honest, I never really knew about. It was only upon watching YouTube videos where they analysed scenes I'd never seen before that I realised I'd missed big chunks of the movie. The skeleton scene with Wendy, yeah, that all missing from the British version. Luckily, this 4K set now includes it, but it definitely kept up the mystique of the movie. Now, the Holocaust idea links to the fact that Jack uses an Adler typewriter. This also changes colour throughout the movie, going from light tan to a grey blue. During the Holocaust, it was used to take people's names before they were shipped off to the ghetto and then the concentration camps. So many have theorized that this symbolizes this dark event in history. The colour change could potentially show the darkness sweeping over the hotel and characters, and it is interesting how it changes colour throughout the movie. Now, I'm not sure how much merit there is to that, as this was the same model that Kubrick used, and he could have just been putting this in as a reference to himself. Again though, there's also the Native American genocide, which I think holds far more weight. God knows King loved using them as mystical plot devices, and we've had them in both It and I Don't Wanna Be Buried in a Pet Cemetery. When Ullman's showing the family around though, he does touch upon this detail.
The site is supposed to be located on an Indian burial ground, and I believe they actually had to repel a few Indian attacks as they were building it.
There's even theories that the elevator shaft leads directly underground, and when they were building it, the hotel staff had to shift the corpses out the way. This is what the river of blood could symbolize, and it's bringing everything up that's buried beneath the surface. There's also the music at the start, which has wailing over the top of it. This sounds similar to a Native American chant and could be hinting at what's really going on. Throughout the hotel, we also have several pictures that signify this. For example, when Jack's about to enter Mr. Ullman's office, we can see a painting to his left which is called the Great Mother. There's also several paintings of Native Americans throughout the hotel as they get shown around. When we get to the fridge and Dick's talking away, we can also see some food with a prominent Native American figure on it. This was later used in the supermarket during Welcome to Derry, and it's clearly an iconic product in the film. Wendy also later on wears a yellow coat with Native American designs on it, and there's also the tapestry in the main hall. Rob Eger pointed out that Jack constantly throws a ball at this, and eventually he ends up chucking it in a way that's very similar to the axe motion he uses on the door. There's just a hell of a lot of depth to it, and for the rest of the video, I want to go through the movie scene by scene and also talk about the book alongside it. From the off, the movie sets a tone instantly with a flyover of Jack driving to his job interview. This is far away in the mountains, and he's isolated on the road and just a bug off in the distance that we're unable to help as he journeys through the vastness around him. Accompanied by these lonely images, we have creepy music that's very tense and ominous. This moment feels like a man stepping onto the path towards his own death. The soundtrack even uses the melody once associated with old funeral services. Which was also used at the beginning of A Clockwork Orange. Now, Kubrick had a lot of footage to choose from for this scene, and they captured a ton of B-roll. This was even to the point that Ridley Scott reached out to him after test audiences didn't like the ending of Blade Runner. Kubrick sent over 17 hours worth of footage for him to use, and you can see some of the shots as they close out the theatrical cut. Early on, it's impressed upon the viewer though that the hotel's cut off from everything. There's even a little subtle thing that I caught in this viewing at the 2-minute full mark. Jack passes by a car at the side of the road, which has both of its doors wide open. You can't see a passenger or driver, and it just gives the idea that the ride's been abandoned, even though they're probably just off looking at the view. But yeah, don't leave your car doors wide open and leave the car, mate. Surely you know that, yeah? Constantly set behind the Beetle, this further gives the feeling of stalking, and we're almost like a spirit following behind it. As we follow the car, we then see wide shots of the hotel with the mountain range behind it. Hammers home that this hotel is the antagonist of the movie that looms over all. Now, while King simply made it a ghost house, I think Kubrick went more for a psychological horror, which works really well with the master filmmaker's skills. In regards to the parking lot as well, there's actually 42 cars parked up at the Overlook. 42 is a number that later appears on Danny's t-shirt in the bathroom, and when we cut to the TV scene, we can also catch the Summer of 42 playing on it. This TV also doesn't have any electrical cables, which adds a further headfuck as it's not plugged in anywhere. $42 million is also mentioned later on, and it could also link in with room 237. If you do 2 times 3 times 7, then you get 42.
Quick maths!
Now, why does Kubrick keep doing all this stuff with 42? Well, again, tying back to the Holocaust theory, 1942 is the year that the final solution was put in place, and it could be Kubrick hinting towards that. I did even wonder if the Native American and Holocaust rivers of blood were linked, and just like time is cyclical in the hotel, humans ultimately commit horrendous acts of evil over and over and over again. Now, that might be a reach, but to be fair, Kubrick actually wanted to make a movie about the Holocaust that he ended up scrapping after Spielberg made Schindler's List, which yeah, you can understand why. It's great fucking film. During this car park scene as well, if you look at the top of the screen, you can also see the helicopter blades spinning there. Kubrick, you hack! Now, the wide vistas fit really well for the visual medium of movies, but the book itself opens right away with the interview. In the film though, we then could do our first title card, and these are used to separate the stories. And yeah, I love later when we just use them to jump about the madness. Now, speaking of the book, the source material actually opens with lots of quotes and dedications, including one to King's son Joe Hill King, who it says shines on. And yeah, I just found it funny how King dedicated a book about an author killing his son to his son. Joe Hill has of course followed in his father's footsteps though, and is now a great author in his own right. So seeing his name pop up here, very, very good. The book then takes a quote from The Red Mask of Death by Edgar Allan Poe. This paragraph focuses on a grandfather clock, and it immediately introduces this idea of time. It talks about how it flourishes up and down, but ultimately leads to silence and revival, and very much a repetition. As for the story itself, the first line is, Jack Torrance thought, officious little prick. Give some context, he's thinking this about Ullman, who basically holds his fate in his hands. The line makes it clear though that Jack's got a deep hatred of authority and that he's got this attitude that he knows best. He then thinks about how Ullman's like an undertaker, and in hindsight, he looks after the deaths at the hotel. Now the movie opts to not really delve into Jack's thoughts and feelings, but here we learn how he's barely holding it together. Jack is flawed but clearly trying his best, and he knows he has a gift in creative writing. He's someone who can teach but isn't meant to be a teacher, and is kind of a contradiction. Unfortunately though, the bills are running high and he wants to put money down for a house deposit but just can't get it together. Thus he's destroying opportunities, getting new ones, and then also destroying them as well. So this is kind of a last chance where he can get paid and work on his play. Well, at least it's a play in the book. As Jack walks in, we get a tease of the ending as the picture on the right side of the door shows the resort covered in snow. In the film, both Ullman and Torrance seem to get along, whereas in the book, it's much more of a standoff. This scene is also why King didn't want Jack Nicholson to play Jack. He felt that Nicholson seemed crazy from the off, whereas Book Jack is kind of lured into the madness. In the book, the full interview then plays out, and then we cut to Boulder as opposed to here, where we see Wendy and Danny at home intercut with this scene. Wendy here is very different to the novel, as there she's blonde and described as having movie star good looks. No offense. Because of this, Jack Nicholson actually asked Kubrick to cast Jessica Lange in the role. However, he was then won over when Kubrick explained the changes he made to the story. Shelley Duvall is just a totally different kind of vibe, very kind of gothic, and even Jack describes her as being like a horror movie addict, which might be why she doesn't seem fazed by moving into an isolated hotel for the winter. Cause me, I'd be like, fuck that. Duvall has spoken about her time on the movie being exhausting though, and almost torturous. Kubrick was known for exhausting his actors, and he'd make her do at least 30 to 60 takes a time. Beyond that, the crew were also ordered to show no sympathy towards her. The behind the scenes footage filmed by Kubrick's daughter Vivian shows just how much of a toll it took on her, and yet, knowing what happened down the line with her, it's difficult to not feel sorry. Now here we see Wendy's reading Catcher in the Rye. At first, it does seem a bit out of place, but the story sort of matches her husband's. As we mentioned, Jack was fired for hurting a student, and Catcher in the Rye tells the story of Holden Caulfield. He's a student who was expelled from Pensy Preparatory Academy. Jack, of course, eventually goes mad, and in the book, Holden ends up in a sanatorium. So while much of Jack's time at the school was cut out of the film, it kind of lives on here. In what's a very strange coincidence, a month after this movie's release, Mark David Chapman murdered John Lennon, and he then sat down and read this while he waited for the police. Very eerie, and I think it's difficult to not look at this book and think of all the controversy surrounding it. Now in the book, we first get things from Danny's perspective in chapter 4, where he comes across as a very lonely boy. The Torrances just can't afford nursery anymore, and this has made him completely feel isolated. He's anxious to go to big school and be with other people, but he also knows that's a far way off. So yeah, terrible social skills, very shy and quiet. So why don't we send him to an isolated hotel for 5 months in the middle of nowhere? Great idea. Danny then says how there's no one to play with near their home, but Wendy mentions Tony. Tony's, of course, Danny's imaginary friend, so I don't think Wendy's too interested in getting him any real friends. Throughout the film, we see Tony manifest itself in a finger wag, and this is something Danny Lloyd came up with during his audition. Kubrick loved this, and it was this that made him decide to cast him. Now, we have kind of touched upon how Kubrick was a bit of a dick, but to be fair, he was quite nice to Danny, at least in comparison to the rest of the cast. Lloyd was just told he was filming a drama movie as opposed to horror, and Kubrick put in a lot of effort to shield him from the scary stuff. In the book, we later learn that Tony's his adult self, and the clue is that Danny's full name's Danny Anthony Torrance. Learning this also plays into the idea of time being something that isn't really how we view it, and Danny's trying to warn his past self of the dangers ahead. Right from the off, Tony doesn't want him to go to the Overlook because it of course means the death of his father. So he tries to warn him, but it obviously still needs to happen. It's a big grandfather paradox in which he'd be unable to change things because he'd have to have them happen to make him want to change them in the first place. Lots of timey-wimey wibbly-wobbly stuff there. It's during this chapter that he also thinks about the first time he saw Red Rum. That was written in green fire at his home, and he then hears a voice saying, "Come out. Take your medicine." This is something that links him with his father, and it's something his father used to say before beating him. It's also something that Jack says when chasing Danny down the hotel, and yeah, just kind of repeats that motif throughout the book, but it's not in the film. Speaking of the film, Danny's watching a Roadrunner cartoon, which is of course owned by Warner Brothers, just like this movie. And it's kind of similar to how It Chapter 1 and 2 also featured Looney Tune cartoons, which, yeah, owned by Warner Brothers as well. Roadrunner also notoriously features a chase each episode, which is something that happens at the end of the movie. And we're reaching! But from here, we then cut back to the job interview. On Ullman's desk, when we flip around to see Jack, you might notice there's a big red book. This is by Carl Jung, and it discusses shadow selves and double sides. This goes into how we all have a darker part of our personality, and Jack's is unleashed later in the movie. We can also see that he's wearing a green tie with several lines across it. These are actually patterned to look the same way that the maze does. Jack wears something green throughout every scene early on in the movie, but later on he switches to red after having a dream about murdering Danny and Wendy. We then see as Bill Watson joins the pair in the interview, and in chapter 3 we meet him as he shows Jack the hotel's boiler. There we learn the Overlook's extremely difficult to manage as a business because the weather comes in and destroys all the pipes over the winter. Renovations cost millions and millions of dollars, and thus they need someone on site to keep the boiler going. The book then outlines it's a very rough 5 to 6 months in which all contact's slowly stripped away. He brings up how eventually the phone lines will go down, and if someone trips and fractures their skull, there's no hope for a rescue. And even a helicopter would take 3 hours to get there in optimal conditions. Ullman in the novel also asks if he understands what he's about to undertake, and again, it's that word connected to an undertaker. But Jack's okay with staying at the Overlook during winter as he's working on a writing project. In the book, it's a piece about a prep school and hating the rigid conformity there. Later on though, Jack discovers a load of documents and archives about the Overlook's history. Thus, he abandons his play to write a book about the hotel. And you could even view this book about a man writing a book about a haunted hotel as the book that Jack writes in the book. Did that make sense? But if it was the case, then Danny and Wendy and Jack are A-okay. However, switching projects shows a big change up in the character. He goes from writing about himself and maybe overcoming his authority issues to writing about his new obsession, which is the Overlook Hotel. This is something I see as the hotel forcing itself into his mind and then taking over. Mr. Ullman then tells the story of Charles Grady and thinks that he must have had a bad case of cabin fever. In the book, Ullman says he made a mistake and the man was a drunk. Even to the point he suspects he managed to sneak in a case of cheap whiskey. But yeah, alcohol and cabin fever don't go well together, but we've stopped that now. Everything's gonna be fine here. Jack just brushes it all off and says, look, my wife won't care that people have been murdered here. Whole family's been murdered here. She'll actually be fascinated with the story and bloody love it. But yeah, the story of the Grady family of course gets repeated here, and even later on we get to meet good old Delbert Grady. Now, the name Charles means free man, while Delbert means bright day, which could refer to the shine and the hotel's power to take people. He's no longer a free man, so he doesn't have the name Charles anymore. We then cut back to Danny, and Tony informs him that his dad's got the job ahead of Jack calling Wendy. On the wall, we can also see a sticker of Dopey from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Rob Ager pointed out that after his vision, this sticker disappears, potentially signifying that Danny's no longer dopey when it comes to what's going on in the hotel. He also gets nicknamed Doc by Dick, and Doc is the wisest of the Seven Dwarfs. The nickname, has other meanings and stuff, but I don't think the sticker disappearing is anything like an accident, like anything that's in Stranger Things where stuff changes color and stuff. Kubrick was infamous for putting stuff like this in his films, and I don't think Dopey disappearing after his vision is any sort of coincidence of conformity gate. Snow White, of course, also features the evil queen transforming into an old hag similar to the woman in the bath. Now, there are theories that the way Danny's leaning over here is meant to be similar to the shot later on with the guy in the dog suit. Many have stated that this is to signify Danny was abused by his father, and later on we see Danny lying on a bear pillow. The child psychologist who comes to visit them probes Wendy, and she does seem to suggest it, but it's important to bear in mind that this only appears in the longer version of the film. Thus, it's difficult to discern what the actual intention for mirroring this scene was. I personally don't like the father abuse theory, but I feel like I have to touch on it because it's definitely a read that's out there. Because of this, it's also believed that the things that happen in room 237 are actually carried out by Jack on Danny. As we zoom into Danny, we can also see the shower curtain pulled over the bath, which is later repeated in room 237. So there is the potential that it's mirroring that for a reason. It's at this point that Danny then gets the vision of what's to come at the hotel, and considering this is the character in the future, it makes sense he'd be able to relay these images. It could even explain how psychic abilities work. Maybe psychics are just in tune with their future selves and they're relaying back things that they've already experienced to let them know what happens to them. Maybe we've figured psychics out. Anyway, Kubrick did reorder this scene for the film, and this scene actually happens at the hotel, and Jack has to break the door down to the bathroom, which kind of might play into stuff later on. Here though, they find Danny sat screaming Red Rum and Roke, which play off later in the book. Red Rum as well, for obvious reasons, but in the text, Jack tries to kill the family with a roke mallet. Danny also can't read well, and his dad says he'll teach him over the winter. So the Red Rum confusion does make sense because the kid can barely read and can't read backwards probably. Now this is also the point in the book where Danny asks Jack if he'd ever heard him or his mum, which is a scene we get later on. That night, Danny then has a nightmare of his dad chasing him with a mallet, and he describes him as a human tiger. There's also the wasp's nest, which is a major part of the storyline as well. In the book, Jack is on the roof and starts thinking about how he's got writer's block with the play. However, it's almost like the whole play's a roadblock in itself. It's the total idea that's holding him back. He then thinks about his life, the drinking, hitting Danny, his student, and then being hired. Everything's been holding him back, and his entire life's been a roadblock. Jack then comes across a wasp's nest, and this becomes a metaphor for his pain. He thinks about how all the wasps could attack him at once and kill him within seconds. He'd be overwhelmed, and it's kind of all the small bad things he's done coming together. Though none of them per se have killed him, they're all little things that have destroyed him bit by bit. Jack then poisons the nest, seemingly killing the wasps, which he then puts in Danny's room as a trophy. Very, very nice gift, that dad. Eventually, a couple come out and sting Danny and Wendy, which causes more issues with the couple. But Jack could have sworn they were all dead, and even checked the nest itself to make sure. To me though, them coming back is somewhat of a metaphor for the ghosts in the hotel, with the nest itself being like a rotten version of the Overlook. Though you think it's okay, there's still things that can sting you. Off the back of this, a doctor then comes to visit the family, which they've of course adapted into the movie. In the film, it's a woman, whereas in the book, it's a man named Dr. Edmonds. He checks him over and also tries to investigate Danny's shine. He simply chalks it up to intuition and actually explains away a lot of the predictions. In the book, one of Wendy's big worries is that they're up at the hotel, Danny has another seizure, and the doctors aren't able to get there. Which I do kind of wish they had added, because I think it would have just put more danger in the psychic visions. Now in the film, the pair then talk about the broken arm, and again this was weirdly cut from the European release. It's a big part of the book though, and we also get some backstory into how Jack's father was abusive. Again, playing into this generational trauma and how the sons often repeat the sins of the father. Wendy just excuses the abuse though, and I love the way we cut at the doctor just thinking, like, what the fuck?
This particular occasion, my husband just used too much strength and he injured Danny's arm. Anyway.
Now just like the start of the movie, we then see as the family drive to the hotel. Wendy asks if this is near where the Donner Party became snowbound, and here we can see the difference between the book Wendy and the movie version of Wendy. Book Wendy was very apprehensive about travelling and thought about all the danger in the mountains. This is something she constantly thinks about throughout the novel, and eventually this worry manifests into fear. The Donner Party as well also fits the themes of the film perfectly. In case you don't know, they were a group heading west from Illinois. They were embarking on trying to find a better life in California as part of Manifest Destiny. However, they were trapped after heavy snowfall and famously resorted to cannibalism. And I still think of my teacher saying doner kebabs were named after them. Danny then asks what the party was, and Jack tells him the whole story that somewhat mirrors his family. They're heading out for a better life or even just to survive, and end up turning on each other whilst they're trapped in snow. Danny then says he saw about cannibals on TV, and I just love Jack Nicholson's line read here.
See? It's okay.
We saw it on the television.
He's a man barely holding on, and I think that maybe the hotel already has its grip on him. Also seen as being like a snobby regarding of television. We see Danny watching TV a few times throughout the movie, and Dick Hallorann does it later when he's in Florida. So it's just something that makes him oppose the two characters with the shine. This approach to the Overlook also reminds me a lot of something like Renfield arriving at the castle in 1931's Dracula. In the book, Jack then thinks about how the mountain doesn't forgive many mistakes, and ultimately it foreshadows their fate. From here we then get some masterful editing by Kubrick as we watch the exterior of the hotel, and then this transitions in the shape of a ladder in the lobby. Not really a crazy detail, just a nice bit of editing. The scene itself is also a little bit different in the book, as the lobby here isn't as busy, while in the novel it's heaving with guests. Jack's then met by Mr. Ullman and Watson as he's reading a Playgirl magazine. Quite inappropriate that in front of your new boss, Jack, but strangely no one seems to notice. Personally though, I think Kubrick's just throwing that in as to have like a little joke at the audience's expense. Rob Ager actually managed to track this magazine down and discovered that one of the articles was about incest, which is what led some to link it to Jack abusing Danny. Now, one weird thing is that Jack never wears a wedding ring, which could speak to their rocky relationship. Wendy and Jack are also shown in the Colorado Lounge, which is where Jack sets up his riding station in the movie. We then cut to Danny in the games room playing darts. At this point, he then gets to meet the twins, who are both mirror images of each other. Kubrick plays a lot with mirrors in the movie, and in every scene involving a ghost, we have a mirror somewhere close by. Beyond this, Kubrick included lots of symmetrical shots, and I think he was hinting that everything is a double side to it. Up in the top left, we can also catch a poster of a man skiing. The way it's shot though has had many thinking that it makes his legs seem like they're angled backwards. This would be similar to a Minotaur, and with the maze at the end, there could be a tie to ancient mythology. The character in this story enters a maze and then manages to escape, which leaves the Minotaur to get lost until it dies. Much like Jack. This idea of doubles also carries over into the next scene. The family are then shown their apartment, and we also have two similar looking girls walking by. In the book, Jack gets a tour after just getting the job, and it's here he meets some of the staff. This includes a guy who absolutely hates Ullman and said he would have hired the Boston Strangler if he worked for minimum wage. Which is ironic, as he did indeed hire another killer. He then tells Jack about the ghosts and the lady in room 217, which that's 217 in the book and 237 in the movie. Why that was because the hotel owners were worried about business and they thought if that was in the movie, no one would ever book that room. But I can guarantee you would have sold out every night. This guy also talks about how he thinks Grady's just been used as a scapegoat for the hotel's big scandals. What scandals? Watson shrugged. Any big hotels have got scandals, he said. Just like every big hotel has got ghosts. Why hell, people come and go. Sometimes one of them will pop off in his room. Heart attack or stroke or something like that. Hotels are superstitious places. No 13th floor, room 13, no mirrors on the back of the door you come through, just stuff like that. We then meet Dick Hallorann, played by Scatman Crothers. It's funny because apparently I had no idea who Stanley Kubrick was until he told a friend he was going to shoot in London. After the film though, from what I've heard, I can guarantee he never forgot his name. Crothers mentioned several times how they had to do scenes a ridiculous number of times, including the knee bit. There wasn't even a stunt double, meaning he had to do this all himself at the age of 68. And oof, mate, my knees hurt just getting out of bed in the morning, so I can't even imagine. King, of course, also sees the character in It, where he was part of a group of soldiers. The excellent Welcome to Derry expands upon his backstory in the army, and if you haven't watched it, really recommend checking it out. I won't give any spoilers for that show, but we really learn just how powerful he is when it comes to the shine. He also guides Danny post-Overlook in Dr. Sleep by giving him a way to lock away the scary ghosts. Dick then shows him how they've got a ridiculous amount of meat in the freezer, which is a huge contrast to the story about the Donner Party. Dick then asks Danny if he likes lamb, to which he says no, which is an opposite to the book, and look, we're being thorough. Now while they have an abundance of food, their horrors are the person who's supposed to be the breadwinner and protector. Dick also calls him Doc at this point, which hints that he knows far more than he should. It's of course a pet name that his parents call him, and he even says, "What's up, Doc?" just like his mum.
Yeah. What's up, Doc?
We also get lots of subliminal shots in the kitchen. When Dick does, "What's up, Doc?" we can see knives on the wall just above Danny. This is then repeated when the pair sit down and talk, and it's just a subliminal hint that the child's in danger. Upon entering the pantry, we then get a weird tone over the top. The audio of Dick's voice then drowns out, and we see as he psychically asks Danny if he wants some ice cream. The pair then sit down, and it's here that they discuss The Shining. Now this is something that happens in his car in the book due to Danny helping him with his bags. Dick actually gets Danny to psychically throw a punch at him, which almost gives him a nosebleed. He calls it throwing a fastball and refers to Danny as a pistol. And the worst thing is, Danny says he didn't even do it as hard as he could. It shows the potential in the boy though, but Dick knows that the place could be dangerous. In both the book and movie, Dick then says that he used to have conversations with his grandmother without ever opening his mouth. Again, this is something that he explains in Dr. Sleep, and it was also shown in Welcome to Derry. Dick is just very curious about Tony though, and the messages that he's relaying. Danny says that he shows him things when he's asleep, but he can't recall them when he's awake. He also can't recall his vision from earlier, and foresight in dreams is something that constantly happens throughout the source material. It's more difficult to do in a movie, as dream sequences are a bit fucking annoying in films, but the way it's laid throughout the book is really good. Dick then says that when bad things happen somewhere, it sort of leaves a psychic energy. This is what allows people with the shine to see them. Danny then reads Dick's mind and asks about room 237. Danny is told not to go in there and that the ghosts also can't hurt him. So let's just go in there then. But yeah, this is why most of the time the ghosts have to use Jack and why they manipulate him throughout. It could also lend credence to the fact that Jack was the one who hurt Danny in room 237, but with that room being the hotel's heart, it may be why it has this ability. This could also be why Dick tells Danny to not go into that room specifically, because that could be the one place that Danny can actually be hurt. In the book, Ullman then takes him upstairs in the elevator and it groans and creaks, which really worries Wendy. She then starts to wonder what would happen if they got stuck there. She imagines them being found in the spring all in pieces, and it's another terrifying thought that shows what the hotel brings out. Ullman assures them though it's as safe as houses, but Jack replies by saying, "So was the Titanic." That was of course a doomed voyage as well, and I love how there's this constant feeling of dread throughout. They then promise to always take the stairs, and the elevator of course becomes a frightening sight in the story. Either way, that's how we end this scene, and we then smash cut to 1 month later. The family are settled in, and Danny rides around the entirety of the hotel. The sound here actually foreshadows what's to come, and it sounds very similar to the music used in the maze scene. Jack is then woken up by Wendy. On his t-shirt we can see the word Stovington, and this is the high school that Jack taught at in the book. Now Jack is supposed to be taking care of the hotel, but he's getting up at like 11:30 after staying up far too late. Later on we see Wendy doing the boiler stuff, and this is all while Jack's just getting over his writer's block. Get back to work, you lazy shit. He's very passive aggressive when Wendy says it's just a matter of settling in to write every day, and the book goes into great detail about how he seems to resent his wife and thinks that his family is ruining his chances of being a great writer. And I definitely did wonder if it might reflect King's inner thoughts at the time. I love how all his sarcastic and passive aggressive faces though take place in the mirror that's later used to reveal red rum means murder. Here we're starting to see his dark side, and that all comes to the surface later. Mirrors have also been thought to show the future our true selves. So we're very much seeing what Jack will later become. Later on, when Jack walks to the gold room, he also walks past 4 mirrors, and when passing each one, he starts to lash out and act crazy, which could possibly show the mirrors are triggering him to turn into his dark self. We then cut to seeing him without the mirror, and he's very nice to her and says how he's never been happier.
I love it. I really do.
I kind of view this as being like in the honeymoon stages of the hotel, where everything seems perfectly peachy, but they haven't been tested yet. This playing out against a mirror also shows how he really has a dark side that's ready to come out. From here we then cut to the typewriter with a blank piece of paper. Jack then later writes out that all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. Sad people, much sadder than the person who's made a 2-hour video on The Shining. They've actually analysed the sounds of the key, and apparently you can hear him typing out this phrase over and over and over again. One thing I love about the book that King does a lot during this downtime is that he constantly uses words associated with danger to describe the inner workings of the hotel. Even stuff like Jack typing away is described as sounding like machine gun fire. The shot here is just superb though, as it's centered and pans up, which I feel foreshadows him chasing Wendy up those steps later on. Here we see Jack doesn't want to go outside with his family even when the weather's nice, and this is further isolating him from his family. Outside we see the two characters who eventually make a break for it, and in this moment Danny runs out to the maze. This shot is then later mirrored on with his escape, and it's these two characters who survive. The maze itself is also new for the movie, and in the book there were bushes around the hotel that were shaped into animals. Jack actually got the hotel against Ullman's wishes because hotel chairman Albert Shockley told him he had to hire him. Shockley was an alumni at a prestigious Stovington club where Jack worked trimming the bushes. They became friends, and thus he thought Jack would be perfect for the Overlook. But he did overlook something. He's fucking mental. In the book, these bushes then came alive and attacked Dick when he came to save Danny. They also seemed to move about the garden when people weren't looking, and they were the first sign that something was indeed spooky at the hotel. It's also one of those things that no one would ever believe them if you told them, and thus no one really did.
What?
The animals actually animate in front of Jack, and this spooks him to his core. He could leave, but in the end he decides not to, and this kind of cements his fate like room 237. But yeah, big scary garden animals, and I much prefer the maze and think it works perfectly in the final act. During production, Kubrick had this entire thing extensively planned and even had maps drawn up so he could plan his shots. The crew would also regularly get lost, and apparently they just shout Stanley and hear the director laughing from all directions. Using a maze though is a fantastic way to visually show the isolation and sense of dread that the movie's trying to convey. We see Danny and Wendy repeatedly get lost and find dead ends while the movie transitions to Jack walking around the hotel. Due to the layout, this is full of dead ends as well, and its corridors are maze-like, which makes it just like a labyrinth. Which is a word that's written on the map of the maze itself that we see when Wendy and Danny enter it. We see this visually as he goes to look over the model of the maze, and there he's standing at the exit, blocking it, and is literally overlooking them. The transition here is absolutely fantastic, and they do a top-down shot of the pair and the actual maze itself. This was achieved through very clever compositing techniques using matte paintings, models, and superimposition. It just adds an otherworldly effect to it, and you look at the maze and like, how the fuck did they manage to build it? But nope, all special effects and no CGI. This is also when many people think that this is when the film switches to Jack's book and he then writes out the horror, having a god's eye view of everything. Either way though, they do some very clever foreshadowing just before he approaches the maze. On the ground we can see a teddy bear, which is in the same spot that Dick's later killed at. It's got a red front and also looks just like what would happen after Dick's been chopped through the heart. Jack also walks past a baseball bat leaning against the sofa, which is the same one Wendy will later use against him. We then cut to Tuesday. We get another shot of the hotel, but the car park's abandoned except for the yellow beetle. We then jump to Wendy opening a tin, which blends in perfectly with the hotel, almost like it's grinding into them. The news report also talks about a woman going missing in the wilderness with her husband.
24-year-old Susan Robertson has been missing 10 days. She disappeared while on a hunting trip with her husband.
The search for them is called off due to a snowstorm coming in, which sets up how they're about to be trapped. We then cut back to Danny riding his big wheel around the hotel, and he passes by the dreaded room 237. Despite Dick's warning, he goes to open the door, but it's not until he gets flashes from Tony that he decides to hop back on the big wheel. But what is in there? I'm not sure how well you can see this art, but that is Mrs. Massey. And this is the Folio Society edition, if you're wondering, full of great artwork like that. Now, the book explains that Mrs. Massey was an old woman who came up here with her younger lover. He basically did a smash and dash, and she took her own life in the bathtub because she just couldn't console herself. From this point on, she then haunted the room. One day, a maid was cleaning it, and she swore she saw the woman grinning in the bathtub. They screamed, and Dick went in there, and though he didn't tell Danny what he saw, we can read his thoughts in the book. He had known that this was his last season at the Overlook ever since he'd seen that thing in the bathtub of room 217. It had been worse than any picture in a book, and from here the boy running to his mother looked so small. Again, tying back to that pictures in a book line and how this goes far beyond that. All the corridor shots are also centered, and Kubrick constantly frames the film with everything leading to a horizon. This is something he does in a lot of his films, but the use of perspective often makes people uneasy. It's also something he repeats with Jack, sitting at his typewriter and having just seen the horror with Danny, this plays off perfectly. The music is excellent here as well, as he appears to be in a trance. We then get a big noise when he takes the paper out. This is presumably to hide that he's writing absolute nonsense, and we can see how he's become more overtly rude and hateful towards his wife. She seems jolly and nice to him, mentioning, hey, it's gonna snow. He then asks what she wants him to do about it and says he wants to finish his work. On the table you can also see a huge book that appears to be full of newspaper clippings. This is the scrapbook detailing the hotel's history, which he eventually obsessed over. Danny has a vision of it and knows if it's opened up the pages will spill out and spell doom. Once Jack has this though, it's almost like the history of the hotel sucks him in and he's never the same past this point. Now it's a massive part of the book and it actually featured in 2 deleted scenes. The hotel guides Jack towards the scrapbook, which he then finds and begins to read. After Wendy and Danny leave the maze, Jack then tells her that he's changing his writing project. He calls it Tales of the Winter Caretaker by Jack Torrance, a winter caretaker tale. I made up that last tale there, but that's near enough what he calls it.
Bullshit.
But yeah, this whole story is heavily expanded upon in the book. He even ends up calling Mr. Ullman and the pair end up arguing. Ullman's obviously been tasked with hiding all the scandals and thus having the history unearthed like this is going to cause a big media circus. However, Jack sees this as a chance to get one over on someone who he feels was rude and treated him like a child. Basically causes a lot of conflict in the movie and is kind of Jack showing his very selfish nature. Unfortunately though, that's all cut from the film, but that story does live on as a prop here. When you're questioning why stuff like this was cut, I think Kubrick was just doing it to kind of make Jack's descent seem more mysterious. I think his anger here as well shows how the hotel's seeping into him and revealing the darkness that's within him. Jack actually drew inspiration from real life for this, as he was also a writer, and even ad-libbed the line,
"Whenever I'm in here, you hear me typing. Whether you don't hear me typing, what the fuck you hear me doing in here, when I'm in here, that means that I am working. That means don't come in."
Just cutting to Wendy's face there is also completely devastating and you just feel so bad for her as she walks back down the corridor. Pay attention to the chair on the wall behind him as well, because I will talk about that later. We then get a hard cut to Thursday and Danny and Wendy playing in the snow. In a deleted scene, Jack actually went out there to join them, however Wendy was upset that he threw snowballs far too hard. He then went inside, looked outside looking maniacal, but yeah, I feel like it's just better cutting it and showing how fucking mental that he is. To be fair, we've all been there on a Thursday, mate. I actually wrote this bit of the script on a Thursday as well, and let me tell you, I was like this. But no, this is the classic Kubrick stare. It's featured in all of Kubrick's films, but for me, obviously, the most iconic ones are from A Clockwork Orange and Full Metal Jacket. This shows that the hotel has him now, and he will be its agent to kill Danny and take his power. This also, of course, builds off the maze scene, but instead of the model, he's now watching them directly. To discombobulate us even more, we then cut from Thursday to Saturday. We see Jack typing while Wendy then uses the radio to speak to the park rangers. In the book, they did a bit more with this scene, and it was actually this ranger who found Grady's children. He then tells her to keep the radio on to keep safe, but despite this, Jack ends up breaking it. Now, speaking of daughters, we then see Danny come across them in the hallway. We get cuts of their bodies all over the floor, as in the book they were found in the freezer. Once again though, Danny's riding his big wheel around the hotel, and the perspective and tracking shots make things feel very claustrophobic. And it just builds perfectly in this line where he has to stop dead, and we stop as we see them as well. We then hear the legendary line,
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play? Come and play with us, Danny.
In a deleted scene, they actually said this earlier when Danny first saw them. That scene was then extended into him playing on the arcade cabinet in addition to the dots. Danny then speaks out to Tony, which is when he's reminded of Dick's words that they're just pictures in a book. Now while Dick said they can't harm him, that's not necessarily true.
Come on, don't bullshit me.
Jack came across the book and was corrupted by the pictures, which then warped Jack to hurt him. He of course also gets hurt in room 237, and Dick mate, you were a bit of a dick with that advice. We then skip another day and cut to Monday. Danny and his mother are watching The Summer of 42 on the television, and Danny says that he wants to get his fire truck. However, Wendy doesn't want him disturbing his dad. Yeah, the lad's a fucking psychopath. Jack once again only went to bed a few hours ago, which again implies he's been up all night writing. He's supposed to be looking after the hotel though, but again, Wendy's doing all the job. She's looking after the kid as well, but Jack's just so invested in his book and just wants to get that started up. Danny then goes in and catches him sitting at the side of the bed, and we can see he's looking very sinister. This is directly into a mirror, and another instance of mirrors showing his true self. Danny then asks his dad if he likes the hotel, to which he says,
I wish we could stay here forever, ever, ever.
It's just like what the twins said when they asked Danny to come and play with them. It's also similar to what Grady says earlier about how Jack's always been the caretaker. The hotel is trying to make Jack seem like a safe place to Danny, but this is a tell that something's up. Jack is then asked if he'd ever hurt Danny or Wendy, however, Jack asks if his mother's mentioned something. In the book, Jack constantly thinks Wendy's out to get him and thinks she still holds the arm break over him. Of course, Jack says that he wouldn't hurt the child, but this is a lie and he's simply saying it to put Danny at ease.
So that was a fucking lie.
But yeah, I think at this point he knows something bad. He's probably going to do something bad.
Never do anything to hurt you. Never. You know that, don't you?
Yes, Dad.
Okay. We then cut to Danny playing on the iconic carpet designed by David Hicks. It's been referenced in so many things, and whenever I see a pattern like this is what I think of. The carpet fits in so well with Kubrick's use of perspective, and I feel like these little tiny shapes, almost feeling like little cages themselves, just makes you feel trapped. The hexagons make a straight line due to the uniformity of design, and it's akin to drawing a cube with a single perspective. So it does seem a bit box-like and like the characters are trapped. It also plays into the maze-like effect here with it creating a path to the bottom of the camera. This is the same path that the tennis ball later rolls along. Now at first he's playing with a yellow car just like his father before he hitches a van to what looks like a snowplow or a bulldozer. This is a bit of a reach, but I do wonder if this is subconsciously him seeing the scene on the road where Dick comes to help. The ball then rolls to him seemingly out of nowhere. Now this is actually a continuation of a deleted part from earlier in the movie. When Jack discovers the scrapbook, a ball's thrown back to him and it's an invitation from the hotel for him to come and play. Now this is then how he gets it and throws it around the hotel. To cut that all out though, I don't really think you need to know, and before ever knowing this, I never really questioned it. But yeah, this ball does kind of connect room 237 to Jack, because he had that ball earlier, and again, if we're looking at the abuse theory, then it does kind of play into that. This moment as well apparently also took a ridiculous amount of takes to film, as Kubrick couldn't get the ball to roll exactly down the middle. Danny's also wearing the Apollo 11 jumper, which is the mission that landed the first man on the moon for the very first time. So he must have faked the moon landing. But yeah, the idea there is that after the 2001 A Space Odyssey, the US government hired him to shoot the moon landing in a studio. Some believe that he did it in exchange for experimental camera equipment that allowed him to film in low light. Which I can actually believe that, mate. I would do fucking anything for a new camera.
I'm afraid I can't do that.
I will lie to billions of people forever. Theorists believe though that this new lens was then used on Barry Lyndon, which has scenes that are lit only by candlelight. But yeah, let me know what you think. And Barry Lyndon is a good movie, I stand by that.
It's fiction. We made it up. We made this one up. It's a made-up tale. It's a total fabrication. It never happened.
The perspective here is used expertly though, as Danny looks at the corridor and is led into an open room 237. Red is again used on the door key, and this shows that Danny's walking into danger. Danny then heads into the room, but we never see what happens to him. Now in the book, it's actually Danny who sees the old woman in the tub. He tries to remember that they're just pictures in the book and can't hurt you, but instead we never actually get to see this. However, the woman later appears when Jack goes to investigate. Wendy is checking on the hotel boilers, which play almost no part in the movie, but do throughout the book. Again, Jack's told to keep an eye on them as they could explode at any point. So part of his job was to check on them each and every day, which is something he doesn't do due to the hotel taking control of him. Watson even jokes that if he forgets, he and his wife will wake up on the moon. Naturally though, he doesn't do it, and the book ends with the boiler erupting, which kills Jack and burns down the location. Once again at this moment though, Wendy's picking up the slack as her husband's going loopy. She's basically a
single mom who works 2 jobs, who loves her kids and never stops.
In the black and white photo above the fridge, we can also see 2 twins. Probably going to have to blur out the entire wall above the desk as well, because there's like tons of nude women in the photos, but Wendy just passes by as if nothing's wrong. But to be honest, if you grew up around this time, you know that men at work constantly had pictures of naked women, and it was all completely normal. You bloody PC woke liberals ruining on naked women. She's then startled by Jack screaming in his sleep. In the book, Jack's asleep in the basement while Wendy's asleep in her room. Jack dreams of the time that his dad beat his mother after a 3-day bender, which is just like how Jack came home and broke Danny's arm. Now this was actually inspired by a real-life incident in King's life. His son messed around with his papers, and the author said that he just wanted to kill him. When we see him, he's also wearing red and dreams about killing Wendy and Jack in the same way that Grady murdered his family. And perhaps the red in Red Rum seeped into his reality. Think it's something that a lot of parents can relate to. Not me, I love my kids, but there will be a point probably when you're looking after them, they do something really bad, and you just want to bloody correct them. You correct them. I corrected you, good work. This scene also contains a disappearing chair that many suspect has been put into our minds. Kubrick was notorious for going on set and messing with things in between takes, and this is the clearest example of that. Over Jack's shoulder, we can spot a chair and a small table, and these constantly disappear and reappear. Whether it's the ghost, whether it's a continuity error or not, we'll likely never know, but this feels like something too obvious for them to not pick up on when editing. But yeah, because of that, people have just thought it's basically the ghosts messing with the background to mess with our minds. Danny then walks in and his jumper is tattered and torn. His parents are far away from him, and the shots also repeated with Wendy when she has to walk towards Jack. I love the way it's framed though, with the real threat to Wendy and Danny's lives being positioned between them. Danny sucking his thumb, which shows her aggression to his childish nature and a need for self-soothing. Wendy then blames Jack for Danny being hurt, which is a natural assumption as he's of course hurt him before. It's even possible that he's tapped into The Shining and psychically manifested in the room to hurt his son. Considering he was asleep and screaming, it's also clear he may have witnessed whatever was going on in there. Jack then gets blamed, and it's at this point he heads to the gold room. Lashing out every time he passes a mirror, he then sits down and literally says he would sell his soul for a drink. And this is something the hotel is more than happy to oblige him with. Jack then just goes with it, and I love the focus on him before cutting to Lloyd.
Hi, Lloyd. A little slow tonight, isn't it?
First time watching it, you're even like, who the fuck's he talking to? In the book, we then find out he has no money, but he's handed over 20 martinis, or as he calls them, Martians. In the movie though, he's got money burning a hole in his pocket, and it's at this point he orders a bourbon. Lloyd here is also played by Joe Turkel, who appeared in Kubrick's Paths of Glory. You may also recognise him as Dr. Eldon Tyrell in Blade Runner and Breakdown on the channel now. He wasn't originally the person that they wanted though, and Harry Dean Stanton was originally in this part. However, scheduling conflicts, and he ended up doing Alien, which to be fair, you missed out on this, but you went to do another classic instead. Like Grady later on, Lloyd's also standing in front of a mirror, and Jack then calls the drink the white man's burden. Now this is actually the name of a poem by Rudyard Kipling. It refers to the US-Philippine War and explains that it's a white man's burden to bring civilization. There have been theories that it's further playing off the Native American themes and how the people on this land were basically murdered or ousted. Did mention that in our last video and got lots of comments saying, you fucking woke idiots, there's no such thing as white man's burden. The fucking poem, then he refers to it as that. It's just a reading. Don't be a fucking dick. You will not gain anything from being a dick in the comments, I can promise you that. You may be blocked. If you say something nice, you'll be blocked as well. Do not at me on anything. No, leave your comments, I'd love to read them. And steal them. Jack then says that Lloyd's the best bartender from Timbuktu to Portland, Maine or Oregon. Portland, Maine is where Stephen King was born, and I feel like this dialogue might have been based upon something that he said in real life. Jack then says,
Here's to 5 miserable months on the wagon.
Now in the book, the 20 martinis or Martians, they were referring to how many months he'd spent sober. Funnily enough though, the 5 months is the length of time the family were going to stay at the hotel, and it's also how long ago that Jack broke Danny's arm. Jack then shows his disdain for his wife, calling her a sperm bank. He says it's nothing he can't handle, which I always saw as him implying he can kill her with ease. And I do kind of feel like he's saying this to kind of reassure the hotel that he can murder them at any point. Jack then lies and says he never touched Danny, which as we know, isn't the case.
Bullshit.
He says how she'll never let him forget what happened, and this is something he keeps thinking about in the book.
The little fucker had thrown all my papers all over the floor. All I tried to do was pull them up.
The drink eventually gets the truth out of him though, and his real feelings towards the kids come out as he speaks about him with contempt. He's then interrupted by Wendy, who comes in and says, "A crazy woman tried to strangle Danny."
Are you out of your fucking mind?
Saying this after just talking to a ghost is wild, but Nicholson's performance is very, very good here, very unhinged, and he even seems half cut.
Which room was it?
It's here that we then cut to Dick Hallorann, who's watching the news. He's sat on the bed surrounded by loads of pictures of naked women and probably just splashed out there gooning. But back then it was normal. It was normal to have naked women everywhere. You fucking woke PC sons of bitches taking away our naked women. He's having a great time though. The sun's blazing, no snow. But yeah, then the holiday's interrupted by a little kid who says they're gonna get fucking murdered. Oh god, oh I hate that shit. Being able to blast all the way out here though shows how powerful that Danny is. Scatman Carruthers actually had to film this over 60 times and apparently broke down and cried once Kubrick said he was finally happy with it. Dick's Room is also very interesting and lots of people have taken it as these nude pictures kind of linking in with the abuse theory. Jack reading that porno mag earlier, you know, with the incest article, that showed that's the kind of thing he was interested in. Whereas Dick here has lots of nude women on the wall, all adults, and this shows that he's not an abuser. Does that make sense? Not my theory. Don't fucking at me. You will be blocked. Even if you say it's not my theory, you'll be blocked. I love the shrill music here though, which also sounds like a heartbeat as Jack enters 237. This is of course the heart of the hotel, and it's so good that they use this as part of the score. Above the bed there's also 4 paintings that appear to be akin to John Gould's painting of animals. These paintings actually helped Charles Darwin discover his landmark theory of evolution. To many, that destroyed the idea of God, but this film taps in there being some form of higher power. We then see Jack head into the bathroom. He seems scared as a lady pulls back the shower curtain, but then sees it's a young Lorraine Massey. Now I see this as the hotel giving him his base desires. He hates his wife, so presenting a beautiful naked woman here makes him want to stay in the room. As mentioned, Massey would often go after younger men, and she'd often seduce bellboys, and is basically the ultimate symbol of temptation. The green in the bathroom also kind of strikes me like it's a sort of Garden of Eden thing, but we see that this apple's rotten to the core. Now here she's played by Leah Bedlam, and coincidentally her last name translates to old woman. Kubrick, you fucking genius with the subtext. She then reaches out and kisses him, and again for me, this is the hotel seducing Jack into its embrace. This is a visual representation of it taking over his mind, and then he sees what it really is. Now I think in general you can see this as a metaphor for the location. We think everything's great, but it's shattered when we look beneath the surface. The truth is then revealed in the mirror, which thematically ties into them, revealing the double side. Now in the book, Jack does visit room 217, however he doesn't kiss a ghostly apparition. He feels a presence and thinks he sees a decaying woman in the bath, but nothing really concrete happens. Jack then goes to bed, and it's in his dreams that he then returns to the room. During this, he awakens in the bathtub, and it's at this point he sees George Hatfield. Jack then transforms into his father and says the same thing that his dad would say before beating him.
Take your medicine.
Again, this is something Danny constantly hears in his dreams when he imagines his father chasing him through the halls. Stalked out the room by a cackling hag, we see Jack return to Wendy like, let's get the fuck out of here. Nope, only joking, he comes back like,
Did you find anything?
No, nothing at all.
probably the most normal he's been all day, mate. Now I know King tried to keep it subtle in the text, but I actually don't mind the change to having Jack 100% see Massey in the room. It just helps the movie show his descent into madness. Obviously, you know, divorce is on the cards too, and Massey is kind of the perfect symbol of being an opposite to his wife. Wendy's dark-haired and Massey's blonde, and Wendy's not sexually open to him, whereas, yeah, Massey's just got it all out for him. I don't even think we see Jack kissing Wendy throughout the movie, and it feels like they're the most sexless couple I've ever seen. And here he's got a promiscuous girl. Jack is just all work and no play though, which may further push him towards embracing the hotel. Now missing from the movie are the discussions about the snowmobile and possibly leaving the Overlook for the nearest town. They actually thought about just ditching the place entirely, but responsibility and duty kept them locked in. And also, I don't even know how you'd resign from something like this because they'd have to get someone straight up away to replace you and would probably sue you. So yeah, Jack's very torn at this moment in the book and thinks of it as just being another defeat in the long downward spiral that is his life. This is why in both the book and film, Jack then says that he thinks Danny harmed himself.
Once you rule out his version of what happened, there is no other explanation.
It's also when Wendy mentions taking Danny out that the music changes to the wailing and Jack finally snaps.
Get him out of here? You mean just leave the hotel?
To me, this is the hotel taking a hold of the character because if Danny's taking, then it's lost its food. All while this is happening, Danny sees the rivers of blood which mark the onslaught that's about to begin. Jack then unloads on Wendy and says that it's really typical of her to ruin his chances when he's really into his work and going to make the best novel of all time. Jack's resentment of her then fully comes out, but in the book, they actually have sex, which is a bit of a weird way to take it. And I do prefer Kubrick's bit here. Jack then rushes out of the room and we get a moment where he looks directly at the camera. Whoa, Nicholson, you're not meant to do that, you bloody hack. No, but this was done for a reason, and Kubrick had Nicholson do it to make the audience feel uneasy. Kind of like when a painting's eyes follow you around the room. I also see it as Jack looking at the presence beyond the room and the thing that's watching him, namely the hotel. Him doing this is almost like he's acknowledging he's acting out what the hotel wants and kind of looking to it for approval. All the while, Dick starts his journey to help Danny. He initially tries on the phone, but can't get through as all the lines are down. Also love how when Danny sends out the SOS, his jumper's red, and the phone here is also red too. It's almost akin to like a hotline phone like a politician would have, or maybe even the bat phone. Jack then goes to the gold room, which is where he sees the party. Jack at this point is assimilated by the hotel and he's beginning to accept his role as the caretaker. This is why he doesn't freak out or act differently. The kiss from Massey was almost like an infection that's now taken a hold of his mind. He was lured in by a beautiful woman and then had the truth revealed to him. However, because he didn't immediately leave, it shows that he's now taken it as being where he wants to be. Jack firstly took the drink from Lloyd, which was him accepting the initial taste of what was going on. The second part was then him receiving the kiss. Booze and women are often described as vices for a man, and thus this is him going along the chain. He said he'd give his soul up for a drink and is now giving his soul up for a woman. This is him further going past the point of no return. The hotel has now become his enabler that gives him what he wants, and he prefers that over his mundane family life. The hotel sought him out by using his two weaknesses, and it's now exploited him. The first was of course his alcoholism, and the second was his resentment towards his family. Now he has everything he thinks will make him happy and thus embraces the eternal life at the hotel. But it does come with a cost, and in order to pay that, he has to kill Wendy and Danny. Now in the book, all the eras of the hotel merge together with people from the 20s, 30s, as well as the 40s. However, here it just appears to be the 1920s. Now, this is possibly because the movie misses out Jack's obsession with the hotel's history after the scrapbook thing, and it's just easier having it contained to this, and then it kind of plays into the photo that we see at the end. Lloyd then remembers that Jack wants a bourbon on the rocks, and he says it's on the house. The dialogue here is exactly the same as the book, despite Jack having a different drink, but we are being thorough. He's then given it free on behalf of an unknown benefactor. In the book, Lloyd explains that this is the manager, and in exchange, he just wants his son.
Orders from the house.
That conversation is saved for the bathroom, and I do prefer Grady being the one to deliver it. At the moment though, Jack is far more chipper and even dancing, which is a stark contrast to his rage in the kitchen. Grady then spills avocado all over him and he's taken to the bathroom. Now this drink looks like an egg, it's because egg is actually an ingredient in it. So a bit of trivia for you there. Also love the visual gag of Jack wiping his hand on his back as a big sign of contempt. Now Grady takes him into the red bathroom, which as we've discovered is the colour of danger. However, something about this may throw you off beyond the garish colour scheme. We know from the way they enter the bathroom that this is located behind the bar. However, as we go further into it, we can see that there's cubicles that stretch out past the original. The width of this means that if it actually existed, it would be over the bar itself, so once again, this is an impossible room. The red paint is also almost like blood, potentially linking to the elevator scene. Now I kind of view Grady as the face of the hotel, and just like Lloyd, he does everything he asks for. He provides excellent customer service, 5 out of 5 stars. Even though Jack's rude, arrogant, and a little bit of a dick, he still treats him as the number one person simply to lure him in.
Well, that doesn't matter, sir. You're the important one.
Jack also calls him Jeevesy. Now, this comes from P.G. Woodhouse's series of stories that follow a valet named Jeeves who looks after stupid rich men, namely Bertie Wooster, but I'm sure you've heard the term Jeeves before. Ask Jeeves, you know the one. It's just another way to show his discontent though, and basically I hope one day Jack's getting the same shit from the next killer. In the book it's through this that we learn a lot more about the history of the hotel, what's going on with this party, and just kind of fill in a lot of the blanks. The party itself has a lot more colour and Jack actually dances with a woman. As someone who watched the movie first and read the book, I did really enjoy going back to the novel and actually learning why a guy's dressed up as a bear that's noshing off some dude. Turns out that Horace Derwent, who ended up owning the hotel at one point, was bisexual and that he had a male lover. Roger in the bear suit was one of his conquests, and the character fell in love with him. Horace said he normally doesn't go back to same-sex lovers, but he said he'd reconsider it if he turned up to the party as a dumb dog. So he did this, and then he got the blowjob, and it kind of filled in the blanks that built out from this party. Bit of trivia for you there. Now in the film, they kind of skip over all that, and Grady just reveals his name, which completely unsettles Jack.
Grady, sir. Delbert Grady.
Jack thinks he's smart though, and smugly says that Derwent was the caretaker. Jack also says he saw Grady's photo in a newspaper, and in the deleted scene, this was actually in the scrapbook. This then leads into him discussing how Jack's always been the caretaker, and Grady does it in such a creepy way. He goes from tidying Jack up, completely in a flurry, to then just standing there completely still as he delivers his cold lines.
Did you know, Mr. Torrance, that your son is attempting to bring an outside party into this situation?
Delbert also uses the N-word to describe Dick, and the racial undertones here are out in full effect. The ball scenes are very much a throwback to white affluence, and the sinister undertones with the racial comments could be Kubrick showing how he thinks the characters viewed minorities. All the ghosts we see are white as well, and it might be a case of the hotel not wanting minorities there. Delbert then goes from saying he doesn't know anything in regards to chopping up his daughters to then talking about how he went and corrected them.
Perhaps they need a good talking to, if you don't mind my saying so. Perhaps a bit more.
Jack's also doing the Kubrick stare here and almost transfixed on what Grady's telling him. Delbert then tells Jack that his daughters tried to set a fire, and I do feel like this was them trying to attack the hotel and finally get rid of this evil location. However, because of this, the hotel enacted in defense and got Delbert to correct them.
You, married man, are you, Mr. Grady?
The former caretaker then says that he has 2 daughters and a wife, saying that they're around. However, in the book, he knows where they are. Saying this implies that they're also one of the many ghosts that we've seen. I feel like the sequence also works twofold. It shows that Jack is getting orders from the hotel, as well as being told information he'd have no clue about that would ruin the hotel's plans to get Danny. The book details Grady is presenting Jack with a loss of opportunity to write a book about the hotel. This plays into Jack's desires to be of higher status in general, and that his family's just holding him back. If he didn't have his responsibilities, he could just write non-stop and make YouTube videos all day.
Time to correct them.
Wendy's also starting to lose it a bit herself and tries to work out how she can get out the hotel. The snowmobile's still there, and in her mind, she and Danny can just use that to get off the mountain. Wendy in the movie's much different in the book, and a bit more meek compared to the source material's headstrong version of the character. Danny's also a lot closer to his dad in the novel, so there is the worry there that he might go to him instead of her. It's at this point that we then get a really iconic scene where Danny starts shouting "Red Rum" and reveals the word murder.
Red rum! Red rum! Red rum! Stop it! Red rum! Red rum! Red rum!
Now, a lot's been said about Duvall's acting here, and she even won a Razzie, although it was rescinded in 2021. I think she's fantastic in the role though, and I feel like this is how Wendy would act in real life. Duvall's mental health issues as well were very, very public, and when watching this movie, I always feel bad for her. But yeah, I think she's a big part of what makes this movie so memorable, and considering she didn't do much else outside of this and Popeye, I think there's a reason that you still remember her in this role. And that's not something you can say about a lot of other mothers in horror movies. Like, think about your most generic horror movie ever that made lots of money at the box office. Do you remember the actress who played the mother? Do you remember the performance? Probably not. As for Jack though, he's now fully gone, and after hearing that Dick's coming, he ends up destroying the radio. Dick's coming, dear me.
You always were a cunning linguist.
In the book though, the hotel begins to taunt him by using the voice of his father. It then appeals to his desperation to be a real artist, which isn't shown in the movie. Dick then racks his mind over what to do, and in order to give us a sense that things are ramping up, the days turn into hours. He then decides to head out there. The looming dread and doom are absolutely fantastic here as we just slowly zoom in on him making the long mundane trip. He's just raw dogging the flight as well. In the book, Dick had a lot more to him and even talked to a person on the flight. He actually hit it off with her, and she even offered to have a drink with him after they landed. But sorry love, I've got to go save a kid from a killer hotel. I hope you understand. But yeah, just added a lot more to his character, and in the book, the woman actually had a little bit of the shine. I always remember reading that and thinking that it was quite interesting, and I think it kind of built towards things being expanded upon in Doctor Sleep. We then cut to Jack typing, and it's here that he's writing the infamous page that Wendy finds later. The noise itself, though, is actually being made by Stanley Kubrick off screen. He had a typewriter with him at all times, long hair, and some have even compared him to Jack. Mainly because he was notoriously difficult on set.
Do it right now, come on. Get him in.
And very harsh to Shelley Duvall.
Oh, come on. What do you mean roll
2
video?
seconds.
We're fucking killing ourselves out here and you're going to be ready.
I am too. I'm standing
So we
right
play
by
mood
the
music?
door.
Which, that is Jack exactly.
How do you think you can handle that?
Back with Dick, he then tries to call into Durkin's auto supply, which is different from the book, in that he struggled to reach the Overlook and actually had to be dragged to the hotel by a snowplow. That was by a man called Harry Cottrell, who also had a bit of the shine. He also told him to call Larry Durkin, however, here it appears that Dick already knows Larry. And I do as well, mate, because he trained Apollo Creed.
Finish this bum and let's go home.
That is actor Tony Burton, who actually showed up on set with a chessboard. He kind of wanted to get some chess in during the downtime, however, Kubrick ended up shutting down production as he wanted to play against the actor, which was a bit rocky on set. Thank you. Dick then takes a red snowplow past the red car, and the auto shop is full of red signs to symbolize the danger. In the book, during his ascent up the mountain, Dick's taunted by the hotel, which is using psychic blasts. At the Overlook, Wendy then goes looking for Jack, and despite chewing her out earlier, he's not actually sat at the typewriter. Now I see this as, despite his obsession with wanting to be seen as a great writer, he's just a lazy sack of shit. He's someone who keeps making excuses as to why he's not forging a great career, but all this time he's been drinking, working, floundering about with a woman in 237, neglecting his duties to the hotel and neglecting his duties as a husband and father. All this time, instead of doing that, he's just been writing all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, which, to be fair, was before copy and paste, so he would have had to type it out manually. But yeah, this all had to be done by a person, and this is why there's lots of typos in the text. This section also wasn't in the book and was added purely for the movie. The shot of Wendy discovering the paper and reading it is also just perfection, and we see her shock at what her husband's been writing all this time. So I've been doing all this work, mate, and you've just been writing this shit.
How do you like it?
Kubrick's assistant Emilio D'Alessandro spent months typing up the pages and had to write enough for Shelley Duvall to rip it up over 80 times on set. And yeah, very good work there, you nailed it. I could not be arsed doing this, but that's life in Hollywood, baby. Also, recently just rewatched Bridge on the River Kwai, and they actually say this at one point in the movie.
All work and no play make Jack a dull boy.
That's about forced labour at an internment camp, and I did wonder if that's why Kubrick picked this for Jack. He's someone who feels like he's imprisoned and basically stuck at this place just doing the same thing over and over. The music then ramps up as we see her from Jack's POV. It's masterfully shot as he appears like a black shadow, showing he's a corrupted figure of darkness.
How do you like it?
Jack then pretends that his writing's normal and that she's got into his writing area after being warned not to. Wendy then pretends that she just wanted to talk with him, but Jack just toys with her, aware that she's scared shitless. Duvall I think's fantastic here, and you can tell that she's just petrified of Jack. However, this is the moment that she really has to stand up for herself and Danny. Jack just plays with her the whole time though, because he just sees her as weak. Even the way he forces her to back up the stairs, it's like a predator stalking its prey, and he clearly doesn't think she stands a chance.
Don't hurt me. I'm not gonna hurt you.
Stay away from me.
Wendy.
Stay away.
Darling, light of my life. I'm not gonna hurt you. You didn't let me finish my sentence. I said, I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains in. I'm gonna bash them right the fuck in.
Wendy manages to get a lick in though, and then sends him tumbling down the stairs. Knocked out, she then drags him to the pantry. Now while the typewriter and stairs are new for the movie, it's still kind of follows similar beats from the book. They also basically talk about how Wendy's had to put him in bed after a drunken night a couple of times, and it's kind of building off that. I love the little stumble he does as well as he tries to get up. He damaged his ankle during the stair fall, and for the rest of the movie, we watch as he walks with a limp.
You'll have to excuse me now because I'm going to take a piss. Thank you.
Now to me, this is Nicholson's most memorable performance, and watching him turn into a violent psychopath is arguably the best thing he's done.
Ex-murder killer. Right, you just say turn over when you're ready, Sammy.
Jack tries to bargain with her, saying that if she lets him out, then he'll forget that anything happened. He says that he needs a doctor and is trying to manipulate her subconscious want for Danny to have one. For now though, she's keeping him locked in. However, she stupidly tells Jack exactly what her plans are. Jack though has anticipated the whole thing and damaged both a snowmobile and radio.
You've got a big surprise coming to you. You're not going anywhere.
Shocked by this, she then goes to check the snowmobile, which in the movie is red, and that means danger. In the book though, it's actually yellow with black writing, which Jack compares to a wasp, building off what Jack faced on the roof and the cover of the book. In the book, he actually breaks it down a lot earlier, as he doesn't want to leave and thus rips out the magneto so he never has to, and can stay there forever and ever.
Words of wisdom.
Cutting to 4 p.m, Jack then wakes up in the pantry. This is a very similar scene to the book, and we can see that he ate before falling asleep. Grady then tells him off in a very polite manner. He and the others doubt that Jack can correct his wife and child, which plays on his inadequacies once again, especially when he mentions that Wendy got the better of him and is much more resourceful.
The moment, Mr. Grady. Only for the moment.
We also have the tins of the Native American faces pinned up behind him. As I mentioned, it's thought that they represent the bloodshed that the hotel was built upon and how these lands were colonized through violence. This is something that's manifested at the hotel, and using violence to gain what you want is something that's going to drive Jack as well. Jack then assures Grady, and by extension the hotel, that he will kill Wendy and Danny. The doors then opened, and in the book he's given alcohol at this point. Now, one thing I've always loved about The Shining is that the ghosts might not even exist, and you could kind of read as the whole thing being in Jack and Danny's head. That's the way they initially planned things in the script, but it was at this point they ran into a snag. Jack being locked in the freezer is something that needs intervention, and thus the creative team realised that the ghost had to be real. However, eagle-eyed fans have had some theories over the years. Can't remember where I first saw it, but I know it's been said a lot, but when Dick's been giving the tour, we pass the pantry from the outside before Dick then opens it up. Looking inside of it, we have a fair idea of where it leads to, and when walking down the corridor, they pass a door that would clearly be connected to the pantry. Thus, Jack may have just discovered this behind the shelves and then got out that way, because I doubt Wendy locked it. Kubrick deliberately messed with people's heads though, and on the outside as Dick opens the door, we can see the handles on the other side of where the door opens up from the inside. When they enter it, we can also see an office to the side of the freezer, and then they go inside. When they exit though, the things that had just been in the scene before are no longer there, and though it's something you might not notice, you may be thrown off subconsciously. But yeah, like I've said, the hotel's full of doors that open up at other places, and if you do think the ghosts aren't real, then there is an explanation there. There's also the theory that it might have been Danny. Danny may have gone into a trance and then went down there to open it for his father. Whether this was under the direction of the hotel or him just being a good son is up to the viewer, but there are other ways beyond the ghost that Jack could have gotten out. Now, luckily for Wendy and Danny, Dick then arrives in the snowmobile, which just so happens to look identical to the one that the Overlook has as well. Handy that, Kubrick, isn't it? Very handy. You hack! But yeah, this is also where the ending gets a bit different compared to the books. The Red Room scene happens in both, with it being revealed that the word says murder. In the book though, this is actually in Danny's vision, and it even includes the date that Jack will try and murder them. So just write down the date and get the fuck out by then. We then get the absolutely iconic bathroom scene that took 3 days to film. 70 hours of filming, 60 doors were used. Very, very grueling, especially with the bit of trivia I'm going to tell you next. So originally, the production team ordered in those easy breakaway doors that you often see in films. However, Nicholson had volunteered as a firefighter, so he knew the correct technique to use, meaning that the doors didn't take him long to get through. But yeah, you might be able to get through like 3 doors, but 60 doors is very tiring, and by the end, he was completely exhausted.
It turns me into a freaking monster.
And apparently, he ate cheese sandwiches to get him angry before chopping down a door.
Cook a little rice with it or something, will you?
He then utters the absolutely iconic "Here's Johnny" line, which was something that Kubrick had never heard before.
Here's Johnny!
He was obviously living in England, didn't watch American TV shows, and had no idea this was connected to Johnny Carson.
Ladies and gentlemen, here's Johnny!
It's probably better known for being in this movie now than it was for belonging to Carson, and it shows just how much of an impact this scene's had. Danny then makes it outside the window and slides down, which looks really fun. Watching Wendy struggle though is absolutely agonizing, and there's no real way for her to get out. Now, the snow used for the outside was also not real, and they used 900 tons of salt mixed with polystyrene. Despite looking freezing, apparently the whole studio was insanely hot, and the actors would take their warm clothes off right after a shot wrapped. Now, this scene in general is also almost shot for shot the same as the scene in the Phantom Carriage. Huge shout outs to Radio Rick on Reddit for putting this together, and this movie was coincidentally released in 1921, which is the year that we see on the photo at the end. Jack then manages to swing through the door, but Wendy gets a slash in, and she's thankfully saved as Jack hears Dick. It's very eerie as Dick walks through the silent hotel before then being chopped from behind a pillar. Jack then chases his son while Wendy runs through the hotel. We hear the chants of the spirits, and it makes the scene much more creepier. The shot of Dick walking up to the hotel also apparently took around about 40 takes, and his death scene also went up to a very similar number. Carruthers was apparently, overwhelmed, constantly having to do that over and over and over again, and apparently it took a massive toll on the elderly actor. Although the attack is staged in the same way, in the book he was simply hit with a roque mallet and was just left unconscious. Dick actually survives in the text, and there's a whole thing at the end where Danny and Wendy go to visit him at his new job, which I always prefer the happy ending of because I do like him as a character. Danny then runs through the kitchen and he ends up hiding in a cabinet. This actually ended up inspiring Steven Spielberg to do something similar in the kitchen scene that pops up in Jurassic Park. Jack then struggles because of his ankle, and thus Danny's able to get ahead. Building off the Carl Jung philosophies of the maze and labyrinth, there's also ways to apply this to the ending. Jung compared the maze to our self-ideation and basically becoming who we are. Out of this maze, Danny bests his father and in some ways becomes the man of the house. Jack's childhood trauma and subsequent alcoholism led to him becoming the man that he is here. Danny's future self is somewhat chasing him, but in this moment he manages to escape. Unfortunately, Danny does end up somewhat becoming his father, and he too has to go into the maze at the end of Dr. Sleep. Well, in the movie anyway. Jung also spoke about the duality of man and the difference between presenting a psyche and a shadow self, which basically sums up the two sides of Jack. Kubrick even referenced his philosophies in one of my favorite lines in Full Metal Jacket.
I think I was trying to suggest something about the duality of man, sir. The what? The duality of man, the Jungian thing, sir.
Meanwhile, we see Wendy walk through the hotel and discover the utensils that Jack knocked over earlier. She then comes across dead as a doornail Dick and hears the voices from the hotel. The music is fantastic here and it's just so creepy.
Great party, isn't it?
Which is also a line that's right out the book, in that it's actually Danny who encounters the ghost as he's running through the hotel, and here he witnesses the bodies along with a woman asking to dance. As he's outside, Wendy then sees the skeletons, which again were only in the US cut of the movie. I always thought it looked fake, you bloody stupid Americans, you love shit like this, and I kind of wish that when I watched the extended version, I could just cut this bit out. Because yeah, the rest of the movie still holds up completely, but this bit, very, very shit. You bloody stupid Americans.
Are you out of your fucking mind?
I don't know why Kubrick did it, why he was like, we need to give it to these American guys, they love fucking skeletons. But for the British, he's like, no, you don't, you'll have none of that. I know you don't appreciate it. In the end though, you can see that these are people from the party. If you pay close attention to the waiter as well, you might notice that that's actually Grady. I love the mirroring here though, as Wendy's been running around the maze of the hotel trying to find Danny while Jack's been doing the same thing outside, but there he's trying to kill him. Wendy then runs down a red painted corridor which subtly leads perfectly into the elevator scene. This is just so iconic, and when you think of this movie, chances are this will flash into your mind. This took a long time to film though, and the blood itself took 3 weeks to get right. The colour just proved very hard to nail, and overall it was a complete technical nightmare. The elevator, couldn't even hold all the fluid. In order to avoid getting drenched, the camera operators also had to stand on wooden boxes and basically dart out the way. All the work paid off as it looks absolutely stunning. The life as a camera operator on one of these movies though must have completely sucked, and even in the maze scene they had to wear gas masks the entire time because of all this shit being kicked up. This production in general, like if you read books on it, complete fucking disaster, and it went from a 17-week shoot to almost a year shooting it. And at one point the hotel even burned down, which, thinking about it, was kind of life imitating art, as the hotel also burned down in the book. Now there we have a similar ending to what we get in the Doctor Sleep film, with it being a case of waiting until the boiler blows. Most of the stuff that we remember from this film though is stuff that Kubrick came up with, including the River of Blood. I think it's a testament to Kubrick that he managed to adapt the book and along the way added in some of the most iconic shots ever put to film. Danny then outsmarts his dad by covering his footsteps, which leads to Jack freezing in the cold. Now, if we look at it in kind of a Jungian way, Jack is trapped in his own mind. He succumbed to his violent and abusive nature, which has now led to his downfall. That mumbling and moaning is a lot like what he did at the table, and it's him going back to a regressive state that there's no escape from. The relapse into drinking is like a repeating maze with no end, and ultimately it's led to his downfall. Wendy has also had to awaken to the idea that he's the danger. Jack descended into his dark shadow self while she's woken up to a lighter side and took action. Also, don't feel like it's any coincidence that both of them are running through the hotel with weapons either. As well as the dark and light self, we can also see there's two parents fighting for the control of their child. Danny then manages to escape with Wendy, whereas Jack's stuck in the hotel forever, and basically loses the custody battle. We then end with him sitting down and then do a jump cut to him frozen there the next day. Metaphorically, he will be forever frozen in time, forever at this hotel, unable to truly ever leave the maze. Kubrick was of course known for doing jump cuts, and the most famous of these was probably at the start of 2001. However, I feel like this moment is another of his best. Huge shoutouts to Depression Obsession on Reddit for pointing out that the expression here is also the same thing that he has when he has his first drink. The user even placed the two moments over the top of each other, and we can see how they perfectly line up. We then cut to the photograph and see Jack perhaps hinting at this cycle of violence being something that's forever ongoing, and a moment forever fixed in time, just like a photograph. We then end with Midnight the Stars Are New, which closes out the movie on a very haunting note. Now the photo itself was actually airbrushed, with the original being of the Valentine's Day ball in London. It's an extremely haunting image though, and there's so much you can read into it. There are even theories that those in the photos could be the victims the hotel's taken, rather than this just being a photo of 1921. Jack's now just been absorbed into the image there, and it's likely he wasn't there before but has just been absorbed into the hotel. This would also explain why the family never walked past the photo and noticed it, though they may have just not been paying attention to it. It's kind of terrifying to think that Jack's soul's trapped behind that photo, screaming for eternity, while outwardly his face is forever frozen in this unwavering grin. Now, if the absorption theory is correct, then the reincarnation thing could mean that this is a version of Jack that was snapped at the party, and then years later he showed back up there in a new life. Either way, what this represents is that the hotel has had and will continue to have violent events attached to it. Doesn't matter how long it takes, it will eventually happen, and the same sorts of people's mindsets will be pulled in by its allure. Whether it's the isolation or the rage bubbling over the top within people, the hotel will lure those in that it can manipulate, and eventually they'll fall victim to its wicked and evil ways. So it's a very dour ending, but apparently Kubrick had a soft spot for Danny and Wendy and wanted to make the audience aware that they were fine after everything that happened. So they then shot that ending with Ullman that we mentioned earlier, but ultimately they cut that because Kubrick's a fucking bastard. So we end with their fate ambiguous, while we close in on Jack's cold and never-ending stare. The TV show by King also showed Danny's graduation and had an older version of him realizing that Tony was a future version of himself. And it sucked. But overall, I think this movie still stands up and is my favourite Kubrick film. It's up there in my greatest of all times list, and akin to something like The Godfather and Thing, where it's a topic of conversation as soon as someone asks me what the best of the best of the best Sir films are, sir. Hope you guys have enjoyed us going through it though. It's starting to break me a bit, and I'd of course love to hear your thoughts on the film. Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul. In this video, we're breaking down Dr. Sleep. Now, it still blows my mind that in 2019 we got It Chapter 2 and Doctor Sleep as well. I never thought we'd get a sequel to The Shining, and as the years went on, it just seemed less and less likely. That's arguably King's most famous book, and in my humble opinion, it's one of the greatest films of all time. When you've got something that popular though, ideas are going to start to stir, and in the end, the studio and King just couldn't keep away from it. Now, King mentioned the prospect of a sequel in 2009 and launched a vote for what he should write next. The choices were Doctor Sleep or a brand new Dark Tower book, with Sleep winning by only about 50 votes. Don't let them ever say that voting never works, kids. But yeah, that came out on top, and he got to work and began crafting what seemed like an impossible sequel. I actually spoke to Jared Bauer, who has a great take on why this was seen as being an impossible thing to attempt, and he's put it into words much better than I ever will.
Thanks, Paul. Hey, I'm Jared. I make philosophical breakdowns of movies over on my channel, and Doctor Sleep is a fascinating and genuinely rare type of sequel. I mean, it's got everything going against it. It's a sequel to a classic. Tonally, it feels nothing like the original, and yet it's really quite good. But what makes Doctor Sleep truly unusual is that it operates under a fundamentally different philosophy of storytelling than The Shining. Doctor Sleep exists in a strange in-between space. It's both a sequel to King's book and Kubrick's movie, even though Kubrick changed so much from King's novel that King famously hated the adaptation. Flanagan develops plot elements that Kubrick omitted but were central to King's novel, while also recreating Kubrick's imagery, sets, and even casting sorta lookalikes to anchor the film in Kubrick's world. But there are consequences to Flanagan's approach. One could argue it makes the first film less impactful. Kubrick believed that a lot of a story's power comes from keeping things unexplained. In a now famous clip where he breaks his rule and reveals some of his intentions to a journalist, he talks about why he generally avoids doing this.
I've tried to avoid doing this ever since the picture came out, because when you just say the ideas, they sound foolish, whereas if they're dramatized, one feels it. But I'll try. I mean, well, that's it. I mean, again, it's the sort of thing that I think is better left unexplained.
In Eyes Wide Open, a memoir by Frederick Raphael, co-writer of Eyes Wide Shut, Raphael recalls Kubrick telling him that things need to remain vague because, quote, when you tell people what things mean, they don't mean anything anymore. And this is a significant part of why The Shining endures. We're never certain what's happening at the Overlook. Are the figures Jack sees ghosts, demons, something about an Indian burial ground?
The site is supposed to be located on an Indian burial ground.
Where exactly is the line between hallucination and the supernatural? Kubrick refuses to answer these questions because for him, the power of the film lies in forcing the audience to live inside that uncertainty. But now that Dr. Sleep exists, a lot of these questions get answered. Now we know they were a kind of ghost hunting Danny for his exceptional steam. And it's worth asking whether this clarity slightly dulls the original's edge, because for philosopher Walter Benjamin, foregoing narrative explanation is one of the most essential tools for storytelling. In his essay, The Storyteller, Benjamin analyzes a story told by Herodotus in his Histories about the Egyptian king Semiramis. After his kingdom is overthrown by the Persians, Semiramis is forced to watch his loved ones walk by in a brutal procession stripped of all dignity. First, his daughter walks by, humiliated and abused. Semiramis doesn't react. Then his son. Again, no reaction. Then finally his servant walks by and Semiramis breaks down into tears. Why? Was this just his breaking point? Was there something special about the servant? Herodotus never explains why, and for Benjamin, that's the point. Any explanation would flatten the story. It's the lack of explanation that gives the story narrative tension and keeps people thinking about, retelling, and interpreting the story for centuries. The tale survives because it resists closure. The same principle applies to The Shining. If you take the lore of Dr. Sleep seriously, there are fewer gaps and arguably less power to the original. But don't get me wrong, I dig Dr. Sleep. It's honestly amazing, it's as good as it is. But if you want to hear Paul and I talk about a sequel that's, well, not very good, but very fascinating, head over to my channel where we collaborated on a video about one of the most bizarre, ambitious, and disastrous horror sequels ever made, The Exorcist 2. Hope to see you there. Thanks for having me on, Paul. And now, back to you.
Thank you there, Jared. And if you want to see our collab where we talk about The Exorcist 2, that's on his channel now. Yay! But for this, King was actually inspired by a therapy cat named Oscar. Staff at Steerhouse Nursing Home and Rehabilitation Centre in Rhode Island noticed that the cat would nap near people who died shortly after it sat next to them. The author was just fascinated by this story and wanted to write about it, which is when he came up with the idea of Danny Torrance working at the same hospital in New Hampshire. Takes things in a wildly different direction, and I don't think anyone brainstorming what they thought a sequel to The Shining would look like would have come up with this idea in a million years, except for Stephen King. The idea of nomadic vampires that travel America sucking the steam out of kids, I don't know where that even comes from, but weirdly it works. The book was then released on September 24th, 2013. When it came to the adaptation, Mike Flanagan managed to land the role, and this was in the wake of him adapting King's book Gerald's Game. He also did the mega hit Haunting of Hill House, and him working in the Shining world was his absolute dream project. This project is actually what he wanted to pursue the most after starting his film career, and I'm so glad he got to make it. While it wasn't a box office titan, it's one of my favourite horror movies ever made. It's got an excellent atmosphere to it, fan service in all the right hats, and incredible performances across the board. Now, because of the legacy of the film and King not really liking it, Flanagan basically had a very difficult task. He had two crowds to please, with those being the big fans of the book and the big fans of the film. However, I think he merges the two sides together really well. I want to work through the book differences as we go through the movie, but I really recommend picking it up if you enjoy the film. I'll also be discussing the differences in the director's cut, which has a number of additional scenes. Anyway, with that all out of the way, very long intro, thank you for clicking this. Now let's get into Dr. Sleep.
It was you. She saw your eyes in me, and she'd have to look away.
Now we open with the Warner Brothers logo, which is being stylized to look how it did with the release of The Shining. This is always the way I remember The Shield, with those clouds in the background and not that 3D water tower animation shit we get today. We also have that same bone-chilling music that opened The Shining, but instead of following Jack up to the Overlook, we zoom in on Violet's parents' RV. It's 1980, aka the same year that the first film went down. Now, whereas Danny got taken to a creepy hotel and locked in for the winter, we see that Violet and her family are on a holiday in Florida. This story was inspired by Stephen King's regular trip from Maine to the Sunshine State, obviously minus the vampires. Being sat there though, he would wonder who all the people in the RVs were, and then came up with the idea of travelling nomadic vampires. And thus the True Knot was born. Aside Pennywise, they're for me the creepiest and scariest of King's villains, and while Dr. Sleep isn't traditionally a scary book or film, the Knot have really stuck with me. There's just tons that we don't know about them, but it's clear they've been around for a long time. They represent the ultimate lengths of depravity that one might go if they had the chance to live forever. Ultimately, they extend their lifespans, but have to lose their soul in the process and end up having horrendous deaths as they cycle. Grandpa Flick is the oldest of the gang, and in the book, he's said to have been around since the Europeans worshipped trees. Flick classes himself as a war veteran, and though we don't know which war he actually fought in first, he constantly updates the wars that he fought in to not draw suspicion from the rubes. Which is what the True Knot call regular people, the rubes. Initially in the book though, he claimed to be a veteran of the Civil War, World War I and World War II. In the book, it's explained how the True Knot owns campgrounds around the US, and they have over $1 billion in assets across the globe. They've hoarded endless wealth throughout their extremely long lives, and are very dangerous. Beyond the vampire stuff, they're also a makeshift group of travelling psychics who extend their lives by huffing on steam, which is essentially the essence of children who have the shine. And yet, that obviously doesn't make things good for Danny, but it makes things even worse for little kids like Violet. Now in the opening, we see Violet, who's played by Violet McGraw. If you saw Flanagan's Haunting of Hill House, then you might recognise her from that. In the opening, we follow her as she goes to pick some flowers and sees the True Knot's RV. This scene is only in the director's cut, as in the theatrical, we see her coming across Rose right away. She makes a confused, almost suspicious face though, which I think works better as an indication of her shine. Clearly sees that something's off for the group, but can't quite put her finger on it. By the lake, she then comes across Rose singing My Wild Irish Rose by Chauncey Olcott. This scene looks like it's something ripped right out of an old painting, and the film from the off looks absolutely stunning. Now, this scene is inspired by 1931's Frankenstein, where the monster's given flowers by a little girl. The opening of the film, though, is a lot different to the book, which basically has the scene of Danny getting scared of the bathroom. Though that scene, of course, comes right after this, I think this is a much better way to open the story. Seeing the villains kidnapping a child, it just lets you know from the off, not good people. Rose is sort of a siren that lures Violet to her death, and though she's extremely beautiful, there's something very dark and twisted going on there. This just hammers home as well that she's the opposite of what we imagine a monster to be like. But Rose is the worst of the worst and charismatically lures Violet in before kidnapping her. Now you might also hear the Irish twang in her voice.
You're wondering why I'm wearing such a funny hat.
That's because originally Rose is from County Antrim in North Ireland and she's over 700 years old. Though we don't know much about her past, we know she came to America as one of the first pilgrims. She then shows off the hat to Violet and in the book it serves as an omen of her looming threat. The psychic characters often get visions of it and it signals that she's got her eye on them. In the movie, there's a long pin on the side as well, which Rebecca Ferguson said was intended to cause the maximum pain in children. This scene also reminds me heavily of it, as she gives a gift to the child and even reads her mind. Violet, however, is then put at ease and just told that it looks like a magician's hat. This is also a reference to the book, as Danny thinks the same thing when he first sees it. The magic trick is then used to impress Violet, but it actually distracts her from Rose's friends. They appear out of nowhere like a magic trick itself, and like all good magic tricks, it's all about making you focus on one thing while you do something else. Rose then pulls out a violet flower and eats it, and says,
"It's the special ones that taste best."
This lets us know exactly what they plan to do, and watching this scene back after seeing it for a first time, it doesn't look good. Now we learn a bit more about them in the book and discover that in the world, the shine is basically dying out, which is why they need to get the super strong Abra. In the book, they actually get infected by measles from Bradley Trevor, which leads to a lot of them dying on the road. There's long chapters of them desperately racing together, all the while suffering from the disease. This is because they never got vaccinated and didn't really keep up to date with stuff, which is quite a wild way to destroy a villain. When you're reading a book, you don't need big massive spectacles, so it does work well there, but I can totally see for the movie why they just wanted to have them standing around getting shot at. As we learn though, steam is purified and made stronger depending on how much pain the victim feels. So watching this again, you wonder exactly what they put Violet through, especially when you have the hindsight of the later scene. In the director's cut, we then get Violet's mother looking for her and can see they're not leaving the campground. It's awful knowing that the mother will never find her daughter and she'll be another kid lost forever. This of course happens a lot in real life and it's just so chilling thinking something supernatural might have grabbed a missing kid. Feels very in line with the X-Files, and the killing of children is what makes the Knot just so scary to me. It's just an immensely unforgivable act, which I even see a lot differently now in my dad as well. But yeah, the fact they're willing to target little kids so they can extend their lives, worst of the worst, who never hit the thumbs up, I imagine. Speaking of child murder, we then cut to the Overlook, which is completely snowed in. We then get that iconic carpet pattern and the name of the title. Now, unlike the theatrical cut, the director's cut is arranged into chapters, with the first being Old Ghosts. Gives us the feeling that it's a bit more like a book, and clocking in at 3 hours, it's quite a long journey. Works on 2 levels, so with it referring to the ghosts of the Overlook, as well as how the trauma of what happened there haunts Danny even after leaving. We then see the iconic Overlook Hotel carpet before Danny rides around. As far as set design goes, though, it looks identical to the legendary movie, which we have actually broken down on the channel. Now if you're wondering how they got this so spot on, it's because Flanagan managed to get blueprints from Stanley Kubrick's estate to recreate the sets. And this is why it just looks completely identical. He even sought help from Steven Spielberg, who used the Overlook for Ready Player One. Even the way we have doors in places that don't actually lead to rooms, just brought it across brilliantly. Though we've broken down the impossible layout in our Shining breakdown, if you haven't seen that, just as an example, we see Danny ride past the balcony which overlooks the main hall. Down the bottom of the corridor though, we can see doors lining the side that clearly extend over the hall, so they don't lead anywhere. Just shows their attention to detail though, and how much effort they put into recreating this. Now though they managed to copy that across, I'm so glad that they decided to get a new young actor to play Danny instead of trying to do some weird CGI de-aging that's all the rage these days. And I remember going to see It Chapter 2 and also having this, watching this around a similar time and being like, well, maybe they should have just left the de-aging because it ain't look fucking good. Now Danny then stops outside room 237, which you will remember is the heart of the hotel. This is what Dick told him not to enter, and we see the door begin to open. This plays in the idea of locking away ghosts and also opening them up like what we get at the end. In a scene that wasn't there the first time, we then watch the old woman slowly coming out the darkness. Now in the book, the woman in the bathtub was Lorraine Massey, who's an old lady who would seduce bellboys. She took her own life in the bathtub and remained there forever and ever and ever. Now we learn this is a nightmare and see Danny after the events of the hotel. He wakes up petrified, and this is where the book pretty much opens at. Although it doesn't feature the dream, and I think having this little member berry works really well to show how Danny's being tormented by his own hag. Sorry, Rebecca Ferguson. And sorry, old lady as well. He's lovely, I'm sure. On his covers, though, we can see a logging truck, which reminds me of the crash that Dick saw up on his way to the Overlook. That collided with a red car, which is something that we can also see on his covers. Heading to the bathroom, we then see Massey's shadow in the bathtub before she draws back the curtain, just like that scene in the original. The director's cut gives us a full-on ghost bush here, which understandably was cut from the theatrical release. Danny then wets himself when the doorknob's being turned, while in the book, he actually pees in the sink, which is very polite of him. If you've wet yourself though, mate, you've potentially stained your clothes, so why not check out our merch store right below the video. Worst interlude ever there, but we have our Kubrick stare poster on there and also our carpet one as well. Not that kind of carpet, you cheeky bad boy. You've been watching that director's cut, you. There's a really cool design detail on that carpet one that I won't spoil, but they're all available below. On top of that, there's extra discounts, so yeah, the more you buy, the more you save. Danny then reverts to how he was the first time he experienced the ghost, and he starts sucking his thumb like in The Shining. It's essentially a revisiting of that moment in The Shining, as Wendy asks what happened, and Alex Esso does a fantastic impression of Wendy. What's the matter, Danny? You haven't hit the thumbs up! She has gone on to be a frequent collaborator of Flanagan's Zone. After this, she starred in The Haunting of Bly Manor, Midnight Mass, The Midnight Club, and The Fall of the House of Usher. Left out the movie is the explanation that Wendy received a settlement from the owners of the Overlook and that she couldn't work due to back problems. We then learn that Danny hasn't talked since they left the hotel, and Wendy goes to check out the bathroom for herself, which is brand new for the director's cut. It's similar to how Jack went to check out room 237, but there's no sexy ghosts this time. She can tell it's real though, as there's wet footprints on the bath mat, which is something that also happens in the book. There it plays in how Dick explains that ghosts leave bits of themselves behind, kind of like burnt toast. Speaking of Dick, we then cut to the next day where Danny meets him at a park bench. The book differs quite a bit here, as Dick Hallorann survived the rescue attempt at the Overlook, and therefore he visits him in person. Wendy decided to call him as he was the only man who'd helped them so far, and she was kind of lost for words with what had happened to her son. For the film though, they've gone with the film continuity, which makes more sense, because when you say The Shining, I know for a fact that more people will have consumed the movie. And even I, a big book fan, have went through large parts of my life where I've been like, oh yeah, Dick's dead, isn't he? Oh, and then I read the book and I'm like, oh no, he's still alive, because that scene in the Overlook where they kill him just so burned into my head. Dick here is played by Cole Lumley though, who'd also reunite with Flanagan for The Fall of the House of Usher and Life of Chuck. The scene's pretty much the same as theatrical cut, but the director's cut adds some lines from Dick that talks about how powerful his shine was when they first met. Dick then asks if Danny remembers the first time they talked to each other in their heads, which is a line right out the book. I think a detail that the film doesn't really get across is that the pair are actually having the conversation in their mind because Danny's still a mute. Dick then talks about how the hotel fed on Jack's darkness, and the movie is very much about Danny not following in his father's footsteps. Danny, of course, does get lost along the way. However, he gets a redemption that his dad never got to have, and destroys a hotel and shuts out the darkness that he couldn't. Even the way they die is in complete opposite fashion, with Jack, of course, freezing to death in that iconic shot, while Danny burns alive in fire. Yay! But yeah, that's all done to subliminally let us know that they went on two opposite paths. Dick then passes down the trick that his grandmother taught him and says that he will then pass it down to someone else, foreshadowing him mentoring Abra. The film's a lot about paying one's debt, and Dick later mentions how he was pulled into Danny's problems and paid the ultimate price. Like, I'm sure the guy was just happy lying in bed with watching the TV with the picture of the naked woman above it. But he had to sacrifice himself so Danny could live, and down the line, Danny has to do the same thing for Abra. This is actually a massive departure from the book as well, as there Danny survives, whereas in the film he dies, and in my opinion it works a lot better as a reflective arc that brings things full circle from that first film. He also talks about his grandfather being a mean son of a bitch. There's a massive section in the book that involves Dick's life as a kid, and it talks in depth about how his granddad used to basically abuse all his family. He threatened them, sexually abused them, and they'd constantly live in fear of what he was going to do next. He actually owned a funeral home and enjoyed causing Dick a lot of pain. The grandfather would even squeeze his testicles and stick cigarette butts in his dessert. Like Danny, Dick was scared into silence as the grandfather threatened him by saying a guy called Charlie Manx would take him away. This is actually a character from Joe Hill's Nosferatu, and Joe Hill is actually Stephen King's son. And the first book is also dedicated to him specifically, which is really nice because it's about a dad who's an author killing his son. There you go, son, have that. Dick even discussed how Dick's father knew exactly what his grandfather was like. However, he turned a blind eye to the abuse as he wanted to get the inheritance, but even after all that, Dick's grandfather didn't leave him a single penny. It was just the last cruel act of a horrible person, and you can imagine that it caused friction between Dick and his dad because he was like, you let me get abused thinking you would get money and didn't even get it. Dick also said he would carry a gun in his waist and would constantly seem like he was close to using it. Something they brought to life brilliantly in Welcome to Derry, which took a lot of the backstory here to flesh out his character there. Dick was over the moon when he died though, which is something we also get mentioned in the book. However, he returned as a ghost, and in the book, Dick came across him sitting naked on his bed with a boner, basically telling Dick to come and sit on it, which was absolutely crazy when I read it. Dick in the movie then explains that his grandfather cut him with his fingernails, and yeah, even in death, the guy was an absolute nightmare. So his grandmother then gave him a box, which he now hands down to Danny. In the book, Dick gives Danny a modern box that has like a fancy keypad, but for the film, I prefer this old looking one that can lock away the spirits. And it just feels something a bit more oldly and otherworldly, if that makes sense. Like if you go to a seance and stuff and they got neon lights and like TV screens, it doesn't look as good. You go to a seance and they've got like Victorian chairs and antiques and tables and candles instead of lights and stuff. Seems a lot more authentic. I think that's what this box is leading into as well. Danny's then told that he needs to build one in his mind after getting to know the box inside and out. However, Danny says he won't shine again as it's very, very dangerous. It's at this point that he decides to keep a low head, and this is how he dodges the true knot. This is also why he later tells Abra to dull her shine. It's a bit difficult though, as the ghosts are reaching out to Danny as they're now starved for energy. This makes him also a mirror of the true knot, and as they're hunting kids, the Overlook ghosts are also hunting Danny. Now I do think it works a little bit better in the book as there the hotel blew up, and I like the idea of the ghosts looking for someone to feed on as they're currently lost and homeless. Dick then explains that Danny can play the Uno reverse card and trap the spirits that come for his shine. Wendy then comes running across to Danny, running like, Danny, where are you? I love the performance again though, and she even nails the run that Wendy did towards the end of the film. But yeah, you can totally see why she'd be alarmed that Danny might be missing, as we also see Violet's missing poster. This reminded me a lot of it as well, as their posters were used heavily in the more recent adaptation. Danny and Wendy then watch cartoons, most notably Bugs Bunny, which is where Danny's name Doc comes from. The pair were also watching cartoons when we first saw them at the start of The Shining, and Looney Tunes is of course also owned by Warner Brothers, so I love that Flanagan even brought that across as a reference. And he didn't even warn a brother. Yeah, the jokes have been pretty shit this video, I apologise for that. They'll be sending you to Dr. Sleep very soon. Anyway, the book of course wasn't tied in with the brand Synergy, so there they were just watching Three's Company. And look, we're being thorough. Like the book, Danny then sees Mrs. Massey once more. He shuts the door and gets to work by putting her in his lockbox, and we can see that the lockbox in his mind is located in the Overlook Hotel's maze. This is the location where he conquered his father, and in many ways, this was him beating the hotel, beating the ghost that had control of him, and escaping the labyrinth it had laid out for him. So it's very fitting that his greatest triumph so far is where he locks up the spirits. Massey screams, but Danny doesn't speak at all, unlike the book, as there he says hello and that he brought her something. I think having him mute though, it's just a great way to focus on the actions, the performance, and what he's doing to finally stand up to this character. He then breaks out of being a mute and tells his mother he's fine, which is right out the novel, and it's here he says there was a little bit of goo left in the bathtub. But now he has peace and can go and live a very happy life, which I'm very glad to see. Oh, never mind. Yeah, I think the biggest shock for me with Dr. Sleep was finding out that Danny's completely miserable. Waking up with a black eye, he remembers sitting at the bar the night before knocking back shots. It's really similar to when Jack sat at the bar at the Overlook, and this of course comes full circle later in the film. In the book, we actually cut to Snakebite Andy's story, but I do prefer that the focus stays on him. We see that not everything has a happy ending, and he realizes that he's woken up in a stranger's flat. She's puked up in the bed, and this makes him vomit as well, which is when he rushes to the toilet. Thankfully, it's not as stomach churning as the description in the book, which did involve a floating turd. Sleep is shorter than King's recent books, but my god, is it still as detailed. If you want an in-depth description of a shit floating in a bowl, then this is the book for you. 5 stars, bravo. He then remembers the woman's name, who in the book is called Deanie, and to pull her, he said, "Hey Deanie, squeeze my weenie," which is one for you guys. You write that down, yeah? If you ever meet a girl called Deanie, you've got the number one line there that works every single time. He then remembers a guy talking to her, which sets off a rage in Danny. The guy who punches him in the book is described as a cowboy, but here he's someone much larger, and it kind of just shows how reckless he is, as this is a guy who could clearly beat the shit out of him. But violence, alcohol and anger are all that his life is, and it all builds out from his traumatic childhood. The idea of becoming his father is then further enforced when Danny goes to town with a pool ball.
You're gonna take.
Now this line about taking your medicine is right out the Shining book. Jack's dad said it as he was beating his mother, which then became ingrained in his mind. He then said it to Danny at the point he fully lost it, and uttered it as he chased him through the hotel. So this is Danny carrying out the cycles of abuse from his father and grandfather. Now his grandfather said this because he worked at a hospital, and Danny of course ends up working at one too. Shining movie didn't really go into it as much, but Jack Torrance was fired after beating up a student. This scene highlights the generational trauma and how a lot of times alcoholism and violence tends to run in the family. We have this constant ideas of sons becoming their fathers, and in the book he remembers this phrase when looking at Deanie's kid. It's in this that he also thinks about how he could kill someone one day, as there's something inside of him.
Shit, I think you killed him. What if you killed him? I hope you killed him. You hear me?
Danny then heads back into the bedroom, and the first thing he does is look for the whiskey. He's completely dependent upon it, and we know that alcohol can dull one's shine. There's also a sign that this woman has a kid, as there's a food pouch next to the bottle. It's the same type that you'd give to a toddler, and it's just sad to see it sat next to an empty bottle of whiskey. Now in the book he had $500 when he started the night, but Deanie convinced him to buy a load of blow. They then went to a dealer to get some drugs, and Danny noticed he had flies flying all around him. As we learn later in the story, this is an indication that someone's gonna die. The more flies there are, the closer that they are to death, but the film doesn't really touch upon how these can be averted. Danny actually saves his friend's life by spotting them, and after an operation, the flies clear up. But yeah, that's something you skip over, and yeah, it just kind of showed the sicker side of Danny Shine, like constantly seeing this stuff. Anyway, this is why Danny spent all his money, and this is why he felt justified in robbing her. In the book, he's more conflicted over whether he should take the cash, but ultimately decides to go Dutch on ye olde Coca-Cola. He even hears Wendy's voice in his head, but he tells it to fuck off. This is truly rock bottom for him, and it's a scene I think a lot of alcoholics will be able to relate to. Now King actually came up with this idea as he imagined a what if timeline in which Jack had eventually gone to AA. But also turns out that in the movie, Deanie is dead, which is actually quite different to the book. There she's still alive, and though he's haunted by her, it's not as terrifying as what they do in the film. Like the book though, Danny sees Deanie's kid as he's leaving, and he then asks them what their name is. There, the kid tries to go for some of the coke because they think that it's candy. Throughout the novel, he's haunted by him constantly saying, "Candy." And it's a word that plays over and over in his head. In the book, he also notices bruises and thinks about getting revenge by attacking his abusive uncle Randy. I think he kind of sees himself as saving the kid from an abusive life like he had, but ultimately he fails to act. Eventually he surmises that the abusive uncle killed the kid, and that Deanie took her own life shortly after this, which is what's haunting him, but yeah, in the movie I think it just works better keeping it more simple. We then see Dick, who also appeared here in the book. However, the line about him putting the money back was said by Wendy. Danny then attempts to put Dick in the lockbox, and we can see just how many spirits that Danny's locked away. He's hit the point though, he's now being a dick to Dick, and with him doing it to Dick, he's obviously doing it because he's running from responsibility. This doesn't work of course though, thankfully, and Dick then says a line that's stuck with me since the moment I first heard it.
You can put things from the Overlook away in boxes, but not memories. Never those. They're the real ghosts.
This line unfortunately is only in the director's cut, and I think it's a shame because it's my favourite line in the film. But yeah, Danny knows he should really look after the kid and make sure Deanie's alright, but instead he takes the money and leaves the baby to starve in the apartment. Danny then dashes out of the room, and we can see a poster of Gene Simmons blowing fire, just like the poster mentioned in the book. The novel then fills in a bit more about him, and we learn that he worked as an orderly at a hotel, but skipped town after this incident. After getting a Kubrickian transition, we cut to Abra Stone, who's playing Teacher Children by Crosby, Stills and Nash. However, in the book, it's actually not a second time by the Beatles. I did wonder if that was chosen to highlight the cyclical nature of the story and how we're back in the shining world for a second time. Teacher Children is really apt as well though. The first verse is about parents teaching their children to be kind, which is something that Abra's parents do. However, the second verse is actually actually about children teaching their parents to be kind too. Now, though Danny isn't a parent, I think Abra is definitely a character that brings him back from the brink and kind of teaches him to do the right thing again. Either way, in the book, this piano scene happened when she was much younger. Abra's mother received a book of Beatles songs arranged for piano, and Abra would listen to it as a baby. Then one night in 2002, she subconsciously played the piano while asleep. This showed that she had a very powerful shine that might even be stronger than Danny's when he was a kid. It was so strong she even managed to predict 9/11, which is something the True Knot attended. They predicted it too and fed off the steam from the deaths in the area. The movie also massively minimizes Abra's family history. The book shockingly reveals that Abra is actually related to Danny. In it, we learn that Jack had an affair with a woman named Sandy Reynolds when he was a teacher. After he was fired from Starvington Prep, she then learned she was pregnant. She then gave birth to Lucy, who subsequently gave birth to Abra. This, of course, isn't in the movie at all, but it kind of explains their connection a bit more, as opposed to, like, the movie which just completely omits it. Abra's great-grandmother Conchetta is also used in the final battle. Danny learns that she has cancer and goes to visit her, and it's here that he finds out about his father's affair and sits with her while she dies. He then inhales her steam and uses this in the final battle against Rose in the True Knot. Abra is then taken to bed, and I like how her room is a similar colour to Danny's, which further shows how similar that they are, or were. The parents then hear the piano playing and go down to see it's doing it on its own. This is Abra reaching to it while asleep and using her powerful abilities to move about the keys. We then cut to Snake by Andy, who's in the cinema watching Casablanca. In the book, the movie was Raiders of the Lost Ark, whereas here it's Casablanca because that's Flanagan's favourite film. Now, in the book, she was abused by her father, and then she killed him by using her mother's knitting needles. This then becomes her MO, and she uses sharp objects to leave snakebite marks on her victim. Well, I say victim, I was going to say victims, but they're nonces, so fuck them. In the book, she also has a rattlesnake tattoo on her arm, which plays into her nickname. She lures men in before attacking, but she always makes them take her to the movies first. Now, in the book, she meets men at bars, but to update it for the film, it's implied they met online. She puts men to sleep to rob them, and then carves the V into their cheek. When the men see it in the mirror, they then say out loud, "I like little girl." No, I will not. Do not clip that. I'll stop there. However, in the book, she just carves it into their face and says that they'll always remember her. Now, as we see, Rose and Crow Daddy are watching her. Found it funny how Rose actually takes off her hat in the book, but yeah, she keeps it on because she's a total dick and do not wear hats in cinemas.
Stupid hat. Damn it. I paid 15 cents for this ticket.
Now, in the book, this was actually Rose, Grandpa Flick, and Barry the racist name for a Chinese person, which I won't say in the video. In the movie, they change it to Barry the Chunk and cast Robert Longstreet in the role. But you're not chunky, mate, that's Dad Bod. Here, though, Crow Daddy gets a lot of focus because he's Rose's second in command, and in the movie, he takes Barry you know what I'm saying, he takes his role as a tracker. It was said in the book that he tracked people during the Civil War, and the film makes him Native American to possibly play into his time in a Native American tribe. As Andy exits the cinema, we can also see a poster for someone called Joe Collins. King fans will know this is a reference to the Dark Tower series, and there's also a poster for Dark Shadows, which came out in 2012. Rose then grabs Andy and says,
"Well, hi there."
Just like she said to Violet. The fact she says that and resists her powers makes you think that she's going to suffer the same fate as the kid. However, Rose has another idea, and Andy becomes our pathway into seeing what the tribe's like. We then catch up with Danny, who's sleeping under a bridge next to a train yard. Cut from the movie is how he actually ended up there, as he went to buy a bottle of cheap whiskey and ended up stealing a homeless dude's blanket. It just shows how he's lost all his moral character and is selfishly stealing from the already downtrodden to survive. The book explains that he's sleeping under the bridge because he owes a lot of rent and, of course, spent the money on Deanie. Rather than using what he stole to pay for it, he instead decides to hit the bottle. We then cut to him getting a bus, and though the scene wasn't in the theatrical cut, it does explain why he ended up at Teeny Town. We can also see Tet Transit on the arrival and departure boards. The Tet Corporation is a big player in the Dark Tower series and is something else that's just a neat little Easter egg. Using the rest of his stolen cash, he then goes as far as he can with the money. This takes him to Fraser, New Hampshire. In the book, he actually bounced around jobs across Albany to Martha's Vineyard, but has never really found a place to call home. We then cut to Abra's birthday party. She hands a message on a card, which is what she actually sent to Danny in the book. There's also a magician, and in the book, he was called the Great Mysterio, after, like, the Spider-Man villain, I'm guessing. Like the book, he then pulls out a rabbit, but here it's grey and not white. And look, we are being thorough. The guy then gets out some spoons and does tricks, which Abra says she can do as well.
I can do that.
That's nice, sweetie.
Yeah, stop ruining the guy's act, love. Trying to watch this shit. But yeah, she makes them stick to the ceiling, which her parents discover in the kitchen. Spoons are a great choice here as well, as they are usually connected to magic and celebrity psychic Uri Geller, who famously bent them. The spoons falling then sends shockwaves across the psychic landscape, and they alert both Danny and Rose. In the book, Danny just had the name Abra come to him, and Rose actually didn't notice her until the murder of Bradley Trevor. Now this takes us into Chapter 2, Empty Devils, which is the name of Part 2 in the book. Unlike the movie, Part 1 is named Abra, but I think the Part 1 title works better for the movie. This section focuses mainly on the True Knot, and it's here that we learn more about them. The name Empty Devils also refers to what Dick calls the group, and it plays in the idea they have no soul or humanity.
These empty devils.
The True Knot are just empty shells of evil who roam the land without any purpose other than living as long as they can. Hey wait, that's me! Inside Rose's RV, we also see Andy's been put to sleep. Rose is dressed slightly different in the book, as there she's ironically wearing a UNICEF t-shirt. This is an organisation that of course saves children, whereas Rose is happy to kill them. The slogan also says whatever it takes to save a child, and you could read that as them saving children for years and years so they can feast on them. And he also says Rose is the most beautiful girl she's ever seen in the world, which is in her internal monologue in the book. Rose then offers her a chance to join the True Knot and to be 15 for a very, very long time. In the book, it's a very funny exchange as she lies and says that she's 28, but Rose knows she's really 32. So it kind of plays in the idea that she's afraid of aging, or at least seeming older. With Andy though, it's quite a tragic story, and due to her trauma, she's been hunting men who like young women. This is something she's clearly had in the past, and up until this point you could see that as being quite a valiant quest, but ultimately she gets seduced by evil, purely because of her own vanity. Andy, like many of us, fears getting older and will do whatever she can to stay young. So ultimately, she of course joins the group that kills kids so they can suck on their steam and live forever. But yeah, just goes against everything she stands for. This perfectly reflects Danny, who's now trying to work his way back to the man that he was. We then get to him stepping off the bus and arriving at a place called Elm Street. Which, yeah, I think that's obviously an Easter egg about another supernatural child killer. Rose at one point also infiltrates Abra's dream, so I don't really think that's any coincidence. Danny then sees Teeny Town, which is a miniature model of the town with the train. Reminds me of the model of the maze in The Shining that Jack loomed over and gives, I don't know, kind of like an almost otherworldly presence. It's here that we meet Billy, who instantly gets the measure of him. As we pull out, we can see a place called Sherwood's, and there's a model just in front of it, angled exactly the same, which was a nice shot, and I appreciated that even though they don't give it any focus. This is also potentially not to Sherwood Bolton, who appeared in King's Rita Hayworth in The Shawshank Redemption. And we are looking for Stephen King movies to break down next, so who knows where that road might take us. Billy helps Danny get a place to stay, and in the book, Danny knew he'd be living in this old Victorian house as he'd seen Tony up in the turret room window. Billy is paid the first 2 months up front, and we can see that there's a huge chalkboard painted on the wall.
Rent's $85 a week, payable up front.
$85 a week? Mate, get me a time machine! He's told to behave and be quiet, as the previous tenant was a nightmare. This is something that reminded me of The Shining, where Jack was told the previous caretaker was a nightmare as well, that didn't hit the thumbs up, and then killed his family. She also calls him Pop, which is what Jack and his father used to do in The Shining. When asked why he's helping, Billy then says,
"And sometimes I get this feeling about people."
Now, as we learn, Billy has The Shining, and this does kind of play upon The Shining book, where it was said that lots of adults have The Shining and can just sense something about other people without necessarily knowing exactly what it is. The Shining that most people have isn't to the level that people like Danny and Abra do. It's just kind of little intuition things, and we learn that Billy's actually helped lots of alcoholics, so maybe this is what he's used his very small gift for. Say that like it. You've got a gift there, mate, but it's very small. Slagging the lad off. Now, Billy in the movie is kind of a combination of characters, and in the book there's also Casey Kingsley, who's missing completely from the movie. Casey also kind of gets merged with John Dalton later on, and the three friends investigate the appearance of the quote-unquote baseball boy. We then cut to Andy, who's adjusting to life in the camp. In the book, Andy and Rose got very close, if you catch my drift. However, with her being 15, that was of course cut out. Especially because the age difference is like hundreds and hundreds of years. It's her turn to be inducted into the True Knot though, which is pretty much a deal with the devil. In it, she will lose herself in the tribe, and they'll be tied forever, just like a true knot. We then get a ceremony playing out with Carol Struckerman in the role of Flick. You may recognise him from Twin Peaks, The Addams Family, and also Men in Black. He was also in Gerald's Game as well, which Flanagan directed. Further to this, John Dalton's played by Bruce Greenwood, who was also in that film as well. He went to star in The Fall of the House of Usher as well, and in the foreground we can also see Short Eddie. He's played by Matt Clark, who also worked as a medic on Hill House. He then applied to work as a medic on this movie, but Flanagan said, no, sod that, you are acting in it instead, we need to fill up the True Knot. We then have Silence Sari, who in the book has a relationship with Andy. She's played by Katie Parker, who's in Flanagan's 2011 film Absentia. We then see Crow Daddy, and next to him is Diesel Dog, who's played by James Flanagan. And if that surname sounds familiar, it's because he's the brother of Mike. Why can't I get in Hollywood? I haven't got a brother. Fuck you, a brother I don't have for not getting me in a movie. In the book, we learn he's nearly blind with cataracts, but these disappear when he inhales steam. Next to him's Apron Annie, who's played by Selena Anduze, who was also in Hill House. From the book, I got the vibe this was a very, very risky process, and they mention that Andy might even cycle out in it. I think once this process starts, it sort of traps you like a vampire. Sure, you can live forever if you have access to blood, but if you run out, you're gonna die really, really quickly. I think it's the same with steam, and they'll all risk dying horrible deaths if they can't get it. The ritual then starts as Flick introduces the group, which is similar-ish to the book. Rose then unleashes the steam of Violet, and we can see her bracelets around it. It's heartbreaking, and it's kind of like how serial killers often keep mementos. After inhaling it, Rose then breathes it to Andy.
Breathe deep.
Also, love how we can hear the heartbeat in the background, and this sound was used expertly last time to ramp up tension. Annie then gets a bit of a blowback, and her transformation starts. In the book, Annie sees the last moments of Violet's life as Rose kills her while the others stand by and watch. It's a slow-motion murder that foreshadows Bradley's death later and lets us know how evil the group she signed up with are. The pain is excruciating, and after Annie survives, she sleeps with Rose, which again is cut from the movie. We then cut to Dan, who wakes up in his room. We see the death flies and then get a jump scare by Deanie. She says they haven't found her yet, and the neighbours were so used to her leaving her son alone, they completely ignored his crying. Which is just awful, awful stuff. In the book, we learn Deanie was eventually found by the super because he kicked the door in after getting tired of knocking. So my wife has just brought me in a lovely latte and some lovely bits of cake, which I'm going to have here. But if you're just wondering why I sat in the video, my wife's just brought it in. Like the video if you like wives. Danny then sees a bottle of booze in his bag. As mentioned earlier, he bought it after leaving New Jersey and was tempted by the whole journey. But having resisted it, it has opened up a new path. Had he showed up drunk, I doubt Billy would have helped or that he would have ever run into him in the first place. But sobriety is changing his life for the positive, and it's a path he wants to continue down. Thus, he knocks on Billy's door. Whoa, mate, that was really quick, that. It was like you were standing right at the door. Well, that might have been the case, and the book explains that Billy's shine kicked in just before this, and he woke up and felt that Dan might be about to do something stupid. He actually kind of sensed he'd just seen Deanie and her kid, and felt, unbeknownst to even himself, that Danny might be about to hit the bottle. We then cut to the AA and see John Dalton leading the meeting. In the novel, a woman is talking about her ex, and Danny's also given a book to write about every single meeting. It's in this that he subconsciously writes Abra's name. Now it's here that we learn that Billy's brother had the same trouble that Danny did, and that Billy basically helped him with his alcohol addiction. He's then given a silver coin, and these represent a commitment and the milestone that one takes when recovering from addiction. It becomes symbolic throughout Danny's journey, and it's there to show that he's surpassing his father. Danny then works out that John lost his watch due to his shine, and the conversation is similar to the book, albeit shorter. The next day, Dan heads to Dalton's office, which is just like Mr. Ullman's in The Shining. Mike Flanagan said that they only did this because it's a job interview in the Shining universe. However, in the book, Dan thinks the same line as his dad did when he was in the office at the start. He thinks officious little prick, which is the same thing his dad also thought about Ullman. I think it's just a nice little Easter egg that kind of shows that this is a turning point for the characters. For Jack, it was the start of his journey towards madness and death, and though for Danny it's also a journey towards his death, it's more that it comes in the form of salvation instead of persecution. I think it's a way of showing that they're both at this turning point, especially when they're thinking the same thing as well. It also highlights that the legacy of the Overlook looms far over Danny and has seeped into his life in various different ways. It's still a lovely bit of cake, this. Leave this all in. Now, Dalton was actually involved in Abra's chapters as he was her doctor. He investigated the weird goings on with her powers, similar how Danny had that pediatrician there when he was a kid in the first book and film. We then learn that Dan has been helping out in Teeny Town, which is just like the book. However, the movie skips forward and omits these parts of the book, which even in the director's cut, I don't think we need. Danny then gets offered a job at the hospice, which is very similar to the novel, and the fact that his father was offered a job as well. We then cut to Andy, who's woken up after her initiation. She's seeing sandy shores and a beautiful view, and it's a stark contrast to the night she's just had. Symbolically, beaches represent a new beginning as the water comes in and washes everything away. Even marks and writing left in the sand all just get swept away by the tide. Also, I think this is quite a common thing because when my granddad was like dying, he kept coming out of his days of sleeping and would talk about how he'd been dreaming of being on the beach. And I know from speaking to other people that their grandparents also had dreams of them being on the beach, and just seeing this as sort of a new dawn, it did kind of remind me of the conversations I had with him. But yeah, she's basically went through a death and rebirth, and hammering home the idea of leaving the past behind, we can hear It's All Forgotten Now by Al Bowley. This is another link to The Shining, as it's the same song we hear in the Gold Room. Andy is seemingly stunned by what happened, and is then greeted by Rose, who once more says,
"Well, hi there."
Andy then says,
I felt like I was dying.
I know. You did.
I think this is a really neat touch with the hello there, as she said it every time there's been someone that she's killed. Now though, Andy has been reborn, and the moral Andy's been killed off and replaced with this parasitic monster. Much in the same way vampires replace the person that there once was. Andy then asks,
Am I still human?
Do you care?
Which is just like what Dick said to Danny. She's brought to Grandpa Flick and embraced into this little child-murdering cult. The hug is only in the director's cut, and we can see that he's covered in liver spots. She's of course only been brought in because they're desperate, and in the past, they would have killed her and took their shine for themselves. We then cut to their ultimate target, who's being put to bed. I like how she has this little stuffed animal rabbit, which in the book is named Hoppy. However, it's just a really nice subtle way to play into her future protector and how his nickname is based around Bugs Bunny, who is of course a rabbit. Are we reaching? You are right, but we're eating cake and enjoying it. Reaching for the cake, if anything. You do kind of get the feeling though that Abra's parents are struggling with her powers, which is fleshed out a lot more in the novel. We then cut to Danny himself working at a hospice, and it's here that we see a cat which inspired this story all along. The cat in the movie actually belonged to the Newton brothers, who produced the film's soundtrack. It's named Azzy, and in the book it's also referred to as Azrael, aka the Angel of Death.
Azzy, come on. Come on. Azzy.
You might also notice that this is in room 217. This is a little nod to the Shining book, as their room 237 was actually 217 in the book, which I feel like I've said thousands of times, but we're being thorough. Danny then finds a good use for his powers as he calms down the patient, and the patient calls him Dr. Sleep.
You're a strange type of doctor.
I told you I'm not a doctor.
Oh, I think you are. Dr. Sleep.
He said it! He said it!
The name Dr. Sleep also nicely plays into his nickname Doc, and we learn in The Shining that Tony was Danny's future self. Tony warned his younger self of the dangers ahead, and I did wonder if the nickname Doc was sent back by him. King would have had to have thought pretty far ahead, but I can imagine maybe him penciling in what Danny may have worked as down the line, especially since his grandfather worked at a hospital as well. In the novel though, this nickname's given by the hospice's administrator, though I do prefer that it comes from a patient. Even if it kind of doesn't make sense that the other patients learn about this nickname, because the guy dies here and I don't know who he told. We then see the mist come out of his mouth, and in the book this is actually red. This does play heavily into the book's version of the final battle, as red steam's infected while the white is actually the pure steam that the True Knot needs from children. And this is basically why they can't just go around to like nursing homes and just suck that last bit of steam out for months and months and months. And if you were in a nursing home as an old man, I can imagine your final wish might be being sucked on by Rebecca Ferguson. Cut that line! In the book though, Danny actually uses infected steam to kill the True Knot, but we will talk about the ending when we get to that. Also, kind of circling back to that idea of 217, I think it's important that it happens here as it kind of acts as a nice sequel to the room from the book. Danny was terrified of entering that room, and Mrs. Massey even stalked him after it. Now though, he's entering room 217 and helping the dead find peace instead of the dead finding ways to torment others. Back in his room, we then see hello written on the chalkboard, and in the book, Danny wrote the names of all the hospice patients and crossed them out when they died. And I would have been doing bets on it. On the morning of Abra's party though, this then gets erased and replaced with the hello we see here. Up to this point in the book as well, Dan has been subconsciously hearing the name Abra and writing it down. I do feel like something like this should have been added in, as it would have foreshadowed the connection and have been a bit better in my opinion, as it seems to just come out of nowhere here. Maybe with the removal of the familial connection though, they felt the need to take it out, but I did, first watch I did find it quite jarring that they just kind of get to know each other, because I would not be going to meet a young girl on a park bench, I can say that. Be like fucking psychic Chris Hansen walking out. You be take a little seat there. I bet no, the True Knot are coming. Why did you write hello on the chalkboard? He doesn't talk anything like that. Fucking shit impression. We then go to Danny sitting on his bed, and it sends him back in his mind to the Overlook, specifically the Gold Room. We are now in chapter 3 titled Little Spy, which is the same phrase that Rose later uses to refer to Abra as. We then overhear Midnight in the Stars and You, which played when we first visited the Gold Room in The Shining. This song was also used at the end with the photo, but I feel it's much more applicable here. This scene mirrors Jack's descent as the hotel lured him in with booze. Here though, there's no Lloyd or imaginary well-stocked up fictional bar. However, the temptation's there with that glass on the counter. It plays not only into his father's moment of failure, but also the way his father will be tested later on. But for now, Danny remains resolute, and we learn that he's 8 years sober. There's some fantastic editing here as we see the coin come in, and due to the superimposition, it appears like it's placed over the glass, almost putting a lid on it. We then get a trademark Flanagan monologue, which is something he features in a lot of his projects. I think my favourite will forever be the boat scene in Midnight Mass, and if you know, you know. After the vision of the Overlook, Danny does seem to have reverted a little bit, as he's wearing a blue jumper, just like his spaceship one in The Shining. Then talks about how his dad was 5 months sober at one point, and The Shining has Jack mentioning how he spent 5 months on the wagon. Thankfully, Danny has surpassed that though. He says he only got to know his father by following his drinking and violence, and it's all that he knew of his dad. Now he's gone beyond that in a much more positive way. In the book, we also read as Danny thinks about how he watches all the others giving up their darkest secrets. They all get up, tell the world about it, and all seem relieved after it. Now he wants to tell the group about Deanie, but feels like it's just far too far and that they'll view him as a monster. Every meeting he bites his tongue, and ultimately people can tell that he's holding things back. However, at the end of the book, he eventually tells the story, which is a major moment for the character. All the others, though, just kind of shrug, because it's the sort of story they hear all the time. And basically, Danny realizes he's been holding this back for years for no reason. Now, again, in the book, you know, Deanie doesn't die by his hand, and I do think that they just kind of cut it out of that because of that. But yeah, it's in this that he not only accepts the past, but in accepting it, he also lets go of it. We then see another one of Dr. Sleep's patients, Charlie. The scene plays out just like how it does in the book, with Charlie calling him Doc, and Danny then gives him the same vision in his mind with lovely memories to make the patient not scared before dying. Just like the book, Danny can taste the blueberries and hear the old radio. The pair then sing, "Come fly with me," and it helps Charlie to go to sleep. I love the way this whole scene's framed though, as Danny's now sat there by his bedside. Rather than reluctantly entering his room like earlier, he's now actively comforting and helping these patients pass. Charlie says how he's not afraid to die now, and this is actually a line that's only in the director's cut. But I do think it's quite an important line that highlights how important he is. Charlie then worries about there not being an afterlife, as he says there was nothing before. But Danny reassures him that we don't end and we all shine on. Now, upon returning home, we then see Abra has finally contacted him again and he writes back school. We then see a figure in her room named Emerald from the anime RWBY. She also has RWBY posters on her wall, and at the time, Rooster Teeth were the studio that produced it. They were owned by Warner Brothers, who also made this movie, and the worst thing is, they didn't even Warner Brother. Kylie Curran, who plays Abra though, was a massive fan of the show, and it actually sort of plays into what she does later on. Emerald can create hallucinations and visions, which is what Abra later does to Rose. Emerald also wears a bob just like the character, so she clearly influenced how she views herself when she goes into that astral plane. It's here that we then cut to the True Knot and see they're gonna have a bad time. Grandpa Flick is really unwell and the book tells us that he keeps crapping his pants. Won't be long until his horrible death, and I think it plays really nicely into the prior scene with Danny. Charlie told Danny he lived a good life and thus he gets a peaceful and pleasant death. The True Knot die in agony screaming though, and to me, they don't really get to go into a happy afterlife. This is why they constantly try and stay alive even though they know there's life after death. They know they've done wicked things and will potentially face judgment on the other side. And yeah, even when Flick dies and they all kind of rush towards his steam to get as much as they can, they don't seem like the people who in the afterlife will be like, oh, I've been waiting for you in the afterlife. They're all predators, child murderers, and fucking dangerous. Crow Daddy then goes to Rose, and we can see she's wearing a Red Clay Strays t-shirt. This is a little callback to Danny, as their song Good Godly Woman was used in the bar scene earlier. Now, this isn't to link the two characters, and I think it's just because the movie's producer, Scott Lumpkin, he also has a record label that have the band on the roster, and I think it would have been easy getting the rights to these songs and this t-shirt. As we learn though, Crow Daddy has been looking for Bradley Trevor, and he says that steam is few and far between. They had some 6 months ago, but like the book, Crow Daddy says it wasn't much. In the novel, Tommy the truck cycled out just before this scene, and they realise that Flick's starting to die. Rose then jokes that he hasn't been well since Nixon, and it plays into how old the group are. Now Nixon's also a president that she mentions in the book after Crow Daddy says there used to be more of everything. There, the lack of steam is compared to like running out of fossil fuels and stuff, whereas here it's thought to be offset by like cell phones, diets, or Netflix, as he says. But yeah, Rose gives in and says she'll open a canister so he can track another kid. Inside we can see they're running low, as the bottom shelf is full of empty vessels while there's only 3 on the top. Bursting it out, they then end up huffing gas like Saw Gerrera. In the book, the camp owners show up and like, what's going on? Andy then puts them to sleep, which is quite a funny scene. But yeah, just seeing how desperate they are though, it does kind of lay the groundwork for why they go and do such horrible things to Bradley Trevor. Now in the book, we do learn that this steam was from a kid named Richard Galesworthy. He was a boy with a shine who aced every test, and this was because he could read minds. Also love how Rose walks off as well, and it paints her as being above these vicious, desperate vampires. All she's thinking about is how there's one less canister in her RV, and I think she might even prefer the group having a little less numbers. We then cut to Iowa and get the whole scene with Bradley, and Rose actually gets a ping of his shine when they're travelling through the area. It's here that we then see Bradley though, who's played by Jacob Tremblay, and he was chosen purely to shock audiences. At the time, you know, he was arguably the biggest child actor in the world, and for non-book readers, it's like Drew Barrymore dying in Scream 1 or something. He'd of course worked with Flanagan on Before I Wake though, and also recently appeared in Life of Chuck. The game we see here though, that was added for the movie, as in the book we just see the boy walking home. He's also number 19, which is an important number in King's Dark Tower series. We then hear a guy say,
"He hits the ball every time, like he can read the pitcher's mind."
Now beyond that, this is a great cameo, and that's actually Danny Lloyd, who played the young Danny in The Shining. We then see Crow Daddy in the audience, watching just like he did with Andy in the cinema, but instead of recruiting the kid, they're simply going to use him as food. I think him reading the pitcher's mind as well also plays nicely into the idea that people might have used their shine to benefit their lives. Things like acing tests and winning baseball games, you know, they're all stuff that would help you succeed in life. On the flip side of this, though, Danny hid away and deliberately dulled his shine to stay hidden from creatures like the True Knot. Even though he's like far more powerful than these kids like Bradley, it's actually his early experience with the Overlook that made him hidden from their gaze. Because yeah, a kid as powerful as Danny likely wouldn't have lived that long if he'd been levitating spoons in the kitchen. Barry the Chunk then talks to him and offers him a ride. In the book, he just hops in, but yeah, we can see he's quite cautious. That's when Andy steps in and uses her powers to hypnotize him. We then cut to the rest of them preparing to feast at a place owned by Lamarck Industries. This is another King Easter egg, as this is a company from the Dark Tower series. Now this scene is just burned into my brain. I remember watching this at the cinema and just being open-mouthed by how far they took it. It's a harrowing moment in the movie, and according to the cast, they struggled while filming it. You just don't cut away and literally see a kid getting tortured to death. Fear and pain, they're what make the steam purer, and it's in this that they get more of a taste. This is also something that King used in It. There, Pennywise uses fear as it salts the meat, and it's a predatory way to enjoy the kill. Bradley screams, then wake up Abra, and this is when Rose hears her telling them to stop. Abra then begins shaking, and it reminds me of Danny shaking when he was going back into room 237. She then screams and rolls around in the bed, and in the book we discover she can jump into people's bodies. So this is why she feels the pain here. Desperate, she wakes Danny up with the word murder. However, he sees it in the mirror as Red Rum, which is an inverse of what he did in The Shining. This is slightly different in the book, as Zari saw it much earlier. The word that first appears when Abra reaches out about Bradley says, "They are killing the baseball boy," which she does later drop on the wall in the movie. I think this change really improves the story though, as seeing Red Rum here is much more impactful. Danny's nose also bleeds as well, which has now become almost a symbol of psychic powers in fiction. I first remember seeing it in Firestarter, which was of course based off the book by King. It's then been adapted into stuff like Stranger Things, and nicely plays into this scene too. As for the True Knot, the way their eyes glow as well just exposes the predators that they are. Animals often have eyes that reflect like this, and it just gives them something otherworldly and unhuman. Inhuman, not unhuman. But yeah, it's kind of like how it works in Blade Runner, and it just shows that something's slightly off about them. Flick then stands up, and we can see that his hair is darker, and you might notice that there's a couple going off to have some romance, which is even more messed up. Realizing Bradley's dead, Rose then seems very disappointed that he didn't last that long.
Damn, I thought he had another few minutes in him.
She then thumps away at him, collecting what little steam remains so they can bottle it up. It's just her basically wringing the rag for what's left, and is such a messed up way to close things out. Rose then tells Crow Daddy about Abra watching them over 1,500 miles away, and even with this steam from Bradley, they're just ready for the next meal. Shows how callous they are and how they don't have any remorse over just ending a child's life. Abra is basically going to be sort of like in a heist movie when it's like the job to end all jobs, and they'll be able to live off her steam for decades. Now this is where the movie and book really start to deviate, as it was at this point that we learned Bradley had measles. The movie also leaves out Crow Daddy being worried they could be identified, which is what Abra and Dan successfully achieve. Danny then writes, "I hope you have a good summer," and in the book he writes it from Tony, who was of course his own guardian angel, and himself in the future. But yeah, he's just keeping things anonymous, doesn't want her finding out who he is, as he basically doesn't know if she's definitely who she says she is. We then see Abra tell her mother she made a new friend, but her mother just thinks he's imaginary. Either way, they do this over breakfast, but in the source material, she was buying cheap second-hand books when this exchange happened. And we are being thorough, I read this for a reason. I will point out every word difference.
I know that head of yours is like a radio sometimes.
Now this is a nod to the chapter in the book Weird Radio. We then see how her powers work as she reads people's minds. Using a computer, she then looks at missing children. In the book, she happened to find a junk mail newsletter that featured the missing kids, but with ye old internet becoming more prominent now, it just made sense to have her doing that. It's here that we then see the listing for Bradley Trevor, and due to the date of the movie's release, the birth dates have been changed from what they are in the book, and we are pointing out number differences as well. Here we see though that Bradley went missing on the 21st of September, which just so happens to be Stephen King's birthday. Abra then goes to her dad David, and we learn that he's a writer.
I won't deny it, I'm a straight rider.
This further enhances the similarities between Abra and Danny though, as Danny's dad Jack was of course trying to be a successful and famous writer. In the movie, she takes on a more proactive role in looking for Bradley's death site, and she witnesses his capture while reading the profile. In the source material, it just came randomly to her, but I do like the increased agency that she has in the movie. We then get a fantastic overhead shot of the convoy and watch as they move like a snake. This plays into their predatory nature and also the fact that they act as one being. The hive-like nature is demonstrated perfectly here, and it creates an almost unbroken line highlighting how they are all one. She then sees where they took him and writes how they buried him with his baseball glove, which is just like the book. Going to her window, we then get a fantastic moment where she tilts the room and witnesses things through Rose's eyes. We can also see a butterfly skateboard hanging on the wall, and these creatures typically represent transformational metamorphosis. This is to symbolize that Abra's now become Rose, and Rose stands at a reflective surface just like Abra. Rose then says her trademark greeting,
Well, hi there.
And she then takes over Abra, who shouts, "Get out my head!" This is just like the book, and we see Rose blasted across the supermarket. Also, I'm a bit annoyed that they didn't have that Native American food can from The Shining here, but you can't please everyone, I guess. They did have it in Welcome to Derry though, so I appreciate you for doing all that. A touch I love here as well is that one of the workers goes to grab Rose's hat, but she tells her to back off. Rose's hat likely comes from the Great Depression, and it's something that holds a lot of sentimental value. Namely because there were a lot of deaths during that, and she probably sucked up a lot of steam. Rose has lots of artifacts like hats and necklaces and stuff, and these are things that she's collected over her 700 years. They ground her somewhat and remind her of a life she may have otherwise forgotten, because yeah, if you've lived for like 700 years, unless you have like a little memento, you're probably gonna forget it. The hat is also thought to enhance her psychic abilities, and it's meant to be a conduit for black magic. In the book, they burn it after her death because it's seen as something that's connected to pure evil. The text even says it sits on her head at an impossible angle, playing into how it's held there by something supernatural. Rose in the book also has a gigantic tooth which only appears when she's going to feast. It's described as being almost like a tusk, and it's hidden away when she closes her mouth. We also now see she shares the nosebleed along with Danny.
Who's Tony?
Apparently, Danny was in a trance calling for Tony, and it's clear he wants help from a higher power. It also kind of shows he's went back to a more childish state in wake of this terror.
When I was a kid, I didn't understand The Shining. I called it Tony.
Returning to the camp, we then see how desperate that Rose is. Talking to Crow Daddy, he then mentions that they could turn Abra. However, Rose does not want anyone with that power turned into a member of the True Knot. She rules supreme over everyone and clearly doesn't want any threat to her leadership. Now, instead of turning or feeding her, she wants to keep Abra alive and use her as a constant source of steam. This will keep her alive and living in complete agony for all her life, which is even worse than being murdered on the spot. It's also wildly dangerous for the True Knot, as they could end up getting caught, or she could use her powers to basically have them all killed. Rose knows deep down though that they're running out of ropes with steam. Now, much of this conversation was added for the movie, along with Rose's idea of using Abra for years. We then get Chapter 4, Turn World, as Abra heads back into school. It refers to how the world turns when Abra uses her powers, just like we've seen in her bedroom. Abra then has the feeling that she's being watched, and she skips school to go and see Dan. Things go down differently in the book though, as the pair email back and forth before meeting. We see her step off the bus though, and the way we have the tech transit here also nicely mirrors the scene from earlier with Dan. Going to the bench, he then acknowledges how sus it is and keeps looking around for that psychic Chris Hansen. Just like the book, she then comes up with a cover story that he's her uncle, which, to be fair, in the book he actually was. This scene of course also mirrors the one with Dick earlier, and he's now become the mentor. Initially, Abra wants to talk in their heads, but he then says,
"Let's use our outside voices, alright?"
He then basically explains what The Shining is and how lots of people possess it to some degree. There's people who come home with flowers when their wives are sad, or do well on a test they didn't study for, or wives who bring their husbands delicious cakes. Something that Dick said to him in The Shining book though, and I'm glad that that line finally made it to the screen. Danny says that a lot of people don't know they shine, and that throughout his life he's only met a couple who did. Now a lot is missing from this conversation, as her grandmother isn't in the movie, and her connection to Dr. John is also reduced to a single scene. I get having to streamline things though, but I did like Dan's group of friends who help him to fight the True Knot rather than it being just him and Billy. Abra says though that because she can touch things and get visions, that she wants to go and get the glove. This will basically offer her a way to find the True Knot, and in touching this she'll be able to find Barry the PC name change.
Because Barry the Chunk. I think that was his name.
Yes, it's 2026, so we will say it is his name. Dan then tells her not to shine, and he advises her to dull the power and keep her head down just like he did. He had his own traumatic event because of his powers, and doesn't want it to happen to her either. However, as we've said, the only way to really dull your shine is to get yourself mortal, or intoxicated, or sedated if we're being scientifically accurate. This is why the True Knot later drug Abra though, as it's something that will hold it back. For Danny and Dick in Welcome to Derry, they of course hit the bottle, but yeah, as we see, doesn't have a positive outcome, and Danny's not giving good advice here. In the book, the pair then talk at length, and she even uses her power to stop a classmate from coming over to them. The novel also had her looking up his old mentor Dick, who in the book timeline died in 1989. New for the director's cut is also him remembering a moment with his mother in which he can tell she's thinking about Jack. As we later learn, he basically took this thought out of her head, and she was then able to look at him, which is why he then goes and stands in the mirror and smiles. Now, as we've seen, reflective surfaces are like psychic conduits that allow one to perceive certain things. Whether it's Red Rum or what Abra did before, that's normally how they're used. But yeah, I did contemplate that it might be Danny looking at himself in the future to see if things are alright. As mentioned, we then catch up with an older Danny and can see that he's reading the magazine Playgirl. Now, he's not a cheeky bad boy, and this is actually a reference to the first film, as it's the same one that Jack read at the Overlook. There's also a subplot in the book at this point involving an orderly who, as we learned, abused the patients in the hospice. Eventually, Danny cornered him and kicked the shit out of him and basically warned him off ever doing it again. It's not really necessary to the plot, but it did still kind of show that Danny still had this violent side within him, as then goes to an empty room, which is where Danny comes across Dick. Plays out differently in the book, and there it's a woman named Eleanor Ollier who Dick used to speak through as a conduit. Here though they simplify, which I think works a lot better, and yeah, why would you waste Carl Lumley when he's absolutely cooking in this movie? I think he does a bang up job of filling Scatman Crothers' role though, and Danny also quotes one of the ghosts.
Great party, isn't it?
Great party, isn't it?
Which later also plays in the movie.
Great party, isn't it?
Come on, mate, you can put more effort in than that. Great party, isn't it? Even I could have done this shit better. Dick then calls this world a dream of a dream and doesn't even realise how many years have passed. But coming back to tell Danny to pay the debt is completely imperative, and he brings up how he came to him in a similar spot. He then talks about the True Knot and touches upon how they're super old and drove caravans across Eastern Europe, which is dialogue that you only get in the director's cut version.
They eat screams and drink pain.
Dick then says that Danny has to help Abra and get what she asked for, which is just like the text. He's told he has a debt to pay, but unlike the book, Dick doesn't tell him to go to his friends. The circle is getting smaller though, and Dick flat out tells him this is the last time they'll meet. It's quite a somber farewell, and it reminds Danny of the debt that he owes. Cutting to Rose, we then see she's preparing to get Abra when Crow Daddy shows her a news article. They work out she's from Aniston, as apparently there was an earthquake there. As we see though, this was actually due to her powers, and thus it's not going to be as straining on Rose because they've got a fair idea of whereabouts she's located. In terms of the movie, these are all additional scenes, and I can see why this was cut, because you don't really need to know like how she found her when she's got psychic powers and can fly across the earth. Rose then reads the article, which is the same as in the book, and decides to go and search for her. Crow Daddy seems to want her to exercise some caution, but like a lot of villains, she has hubris and pride. Now the plan is to enter Abra's mind when she's asleep and basically do an inception to make her hop in the van when they arrive. Meanwhile, Abra's mother says she's going to visit her mother and asks if she's going to pull through. As mentioned previously, the grandmother's a big part of the ending, in the book at least, but I think it still works in the movie having these lines as it shows her parents accepting her gift. and basically seeking comfort in what she knows. Rose then starts to meditate on the RV roof. In the book, she uses steam to help her jump, but I think it works fine without it. And yeah, watching the visuals here just takes your mind off all of that, and it's such a cool depiction of the powers. If you've got an OLED TV as well, then the black levels on the sky are absolutely insane here, and yeah, just one of those standout moments in the film. She seems almost like Peter Pan flying through the night looking to take a kid into her secret world. We then see Abra's house number, which is 1980, which is the same year that the Shining movie was released. We then watch as the house flips, which could be a nod of the book, as this whole thing is described as being on a turntable. Upon landing on the room, Rose then starts going through her mind, which appears like a filing cabinet. And I love how she has one for anime on the left. She mocks her mind and says her mental library looks like a cathedral, and we see Abra going through this in just a bit. In the book, she then relays to Danny everything she learned from the files, and this is how he knows to use the red steam as a way to weaken her. Rose's hand then gets trapped, and Abra appears with her face blanked out on the bed. That and the wig are supposed to help hide her identity and make her seem scarier to Rose. And again, it's of course playing off Emerald. Rose then has to rip her hand out, and I always love the degloving scene here. It's the first time the villains seem vulnerable, and she's just yeeted back to the RV and tossed off the roof. It's a complete opposite of the calm and elegant flying she did on the way there, and is such a good way to close out the scene. To make matters worse as well, Flick is now cycling and dying. We see as Andy's very distraught because she thought they lived forever, but now she's witnessing the horror that awaits her. Rose then goes to comfort Flick, with her speech being new for the movie.
I'm scared.
No, you're not. You watched empires rise and fall. She had the gladiators in Rome, sailed across oceans to new worlds. While you fed on kings and princes and popes. They wrote myths of you and made statues. And they trembled in their villages and beds and skyscrapers. So no, you're not scared.
Now, this shows not only how highly she thinks of the True Knot, but she's basically doing the same thing that Danny does to his patients, even down to the point of saying that he shouldn't be scared of death. As we see, though, it doesn't work, and he dies a horrifying, nightmarish, agonizing death on the floor. It's even more graphic in the book as well, and the Knot then desperately scramble at him. Though they've hammered home the idea they're all a group, this highlights how the individual survival comes above everything else. Dan then goes to Bill for help, and we get the classic helicopter shot of the car driving like in The Shining. In the book, he actually goes to Mr. John, and that's who he goes travelling with to Bradley. Mirroring Rose, we then see Abra meditating on the bed and appearing in the back of Danny's car. She does this a few times in the book to trick the Knot into thinking she's somewhere totally different, and even stays at her friend's house for a while just to throw them off. She then demonstrates her powers to Danny, and we see that his memories are kept in the Overlook. There's the classic Atlas typewriter there in the main hall, which was of course used by his father. Like the spirits he's trapped, he's also mentally trapped at the hotel and unable to really break free from here. Cutting back to the True Knot, Crow Daddy says that Rose shouldn't be there to grab Abra as she's been made. In the book, it's more her idea, and the Knot are currently mourning for Flick. There we read just how widespread the group are, as well as Crow mentions that he got the sedatives from the NSA. Now, though we don't get that here, we do get lip service to it later on.
The rich, connected. I don't think they're worried about the police.
He then assures her that he can capture Abra while Danny and Billy arrive at the ethanol plant. Billy has basically assumed Dr. Rolls right now and takes up much of his dialogue. This whole sequence is sped up though, as in the novel they took flights and also stayed at hotels and just kind of discussed Danny's power. Billy really struggles with how Danny might just be crazy, but does say, look, if you're crazy, that's something I can work with. If Danny's right though, and there are indeed vampiric psychic beings that travel across the land sucking steam from kids, it's infinitely worse. In the book and film, Danny then tells Abra to leave as he doesn't want her to see them dig up the body. Abra defiantly says she can handle it, but Danny knows it could really traumatize her. As they dig, Billy then tells the story about how he went hunting when he was younger and clipped a deer, which then seemingly vanished without a trace. 5 days later, he came across it dead and says the smell was the same thing as what's here. Now, I do wonder if this played into his shine as well, as smell, of course, is a sense. So potentially him smelling that was a way of indicating that he was close to death. Kind of similar to how Danny tasted blueberries before. Because I don't know if they'd like smell Bradley through this dirt. They do find the glove though and take this to Abra, and this is different from the source material as Danny tries to find the knot right after finding it. It's a really sad moment though, and they learn that Bradley actually named his glove after his favourite player. In the book, they also wonder what to do about the body, as they do think, shit, we might get caught and get the blame for this. They do kind of cover their tracks though, and even bought a spade from the next town over, which is very smart. Dan then asks Abra to tell her parents what's happening so they can be aware of what's going on, and if vampires show up to the door, they're a bit more prepared. Heartbreakingly, she then says how they almost think she's normal. Shows how dangerous things are though, and goes against Danny's warning from earlier about keeping a low profile. Obviously, her dad isn't happy when two grown men show up at the door saying they're on a crazy mission. And to be fair, I can totally understand why. However, Abra forces visions of the true knot into his mind. She does this in the kitchen as well, and in the director's cut, we see shots of Bradley and what happened. He then shakingly drinks some booze, which plays in the theme of Danny drinking to dull his shine. You might also notice that from this point onward, Abra wears a red jacket, and this was deliberately picked to mirror Jack's outfit in the climax of The Shining. David suggests getting the police or FBI, and this may be a case for Mulder and Scully. Again though, Danny says they're connected, and I'd love it if we got a True Knot prequel or something, as they're such an intriguing group of villains. In the book, Dan also expands on things, saying that the story of a psychic girl against vampires will push them into the spotlight. The media will just eat it up, and he says it'll be exactly like the Balloon Boy. In case you don't know, this gained worldwide attention as a boy was apparently trapped in a balloon that was drifting across the planet. 'Twas all a hoax, but it kicked up a lot of media attention and was basically a nightmare to deal with. Danny then presents the glove to Abra, and she manages to find Barry and the rest of the knot on their way to kidnap her. In the work, she sees that the measles are spreading and knows that they're living on borrowed time. She also explains that the rest of them are at a campground. Here though, they have Abra astral project and get the knot hunting party to follow them so they can basically lay a trap. In the book, she then goes about her day at school and stays at a friend's, all while astral projecting and following where the hunting party are going. She then manages to trick the knot that she's there by going into Dan's mind and body. Here though, she uses her cuddly bunny, which again kinda plays into Doc. The scene obviously plays off Violet's murder though, with the group all appearing through the trees. Barry then calls it parlor tricks, which is the name of this chapter, and we see as the characters then shot.
Fucking parlor tricks.
And yeah, I love that the master plan was just to lure them to the woods and shoot them from the distance. It's immensely satisfying to see the knot get rocked like this though, and it's just something they weren't expecting at all. Hitting them causes them to cycle, and their bodies then disappear like when you kill someone on GoldenEye. In the book, Abra's dad was with Danny and Billy as well, and he shot a knot member called Walnut. I do prefer that they kept him at home though, as it just raises the stakes when Crow Daddy arrives. In the book, Barry was the one tracking her mentally and saying that there was a ghost blip of her somewhere else other than the campground. Wisely, that's what Crow Daddy went to, and this is how he managed to get her on his own. They also managed to nick Andy as well, and we see she comes out to get Danny as he's reloading. Which, you noob point there, mate. She basically tells him to hit the thumbs up, and though he resists, he's quickly knocked out. Billy saves him though, and in a last act of defiance, she utters a horrifying final order to Billy. She dies laughing as he takes his own life, which is such a badass way to go, I will say. It's much better than what happens in the book as well, where she's just angry that she's been bested by some rubes. But that whittles down the numbers, and Crow then sedates Abra. David arrives waving a knife, which felt like a little nod to Wendy at the end of The Shining. Crow Daddy is so intimidating though, he doesn't care, very calm, and he just says that this is the best meal they're gonna have, and he wants to compliment the chef, which is such a great moment by the villain. In the book, you know, David survives the whole thing, but I think it just raises the stakes to lose both him and Billy.
Some of my people are dead. Some of yours are dead. Outcome didn't change, though.
In the novel, Crow Daddy then discusses things with Rose and even uses an unconscious Billy to keep Abra from acting out. For the film, though, things are at their lowest point now. Danny is all by himself, and he has to face down against these two powerful psychics. Well, one after what happens next. But upon returning to Abra's, he finds David and then stares at the bottle once more. We see him taking this home and almost drinking it. However, he defiantly throws it away and decides to try and reach out and get into Abra. The whole room tilts and he possesses the girl, which is when Kylie Curran does a fantastic job, I think. Like, she completely changes as Danny speaks through her. To pull this off, Ewan McGregor actually recorded himself saying these lines, and then Curran emulated them perfectly for the scene. Like the book, Danny then uses Abra's body to crash the truck. I love the way it plays out as well, with Crow arrogantly not wearing a seatbelt.
Makes sense if you think you're gonna live forever. Of course you wouldn't wear your seatbelt.
We then see Rose scream, and now she's the last one standing. Plays out a little differently in the text though, as they're Abra's father with Danny ambush Crow. But yeah, either way, he dies, and on the way back, Abra encounters Rose in the middle of the road. Abra's completely unafraid though, so Rose takes the rest of the steam and basically shoots all the upgrades into herself at once. We also see her hand completely heal, but to be fair, it was pretty far along anyway. Shows or not, can recover from all wounds though, as long as they're not fatal. Danny then says that they'll go to the Overlook, which is a bit different to the book. There they're not, we're camping at the Bluebell campsite, which is on the site of the grounds that the hotel was located at. When Abra was looking for the group, she mentioned the name, which scared Danny, and you can understand why. Danny theorized though that evil things like the Knot would feel at home there, purely due to the evil essence in the air. As we've talked about, it did burn down in the book, and they have their final showdown on the grounds there. Which, yeah, when you do a sequel to The Shining, you kinda want the hotel back. As we learn, Danny plans to use the powers of the Overlook to trap Rose, as he knows how dangerous this place is to people like them. Danny then fills up the car, and I did wonder if this was supposed to be Durkin's, which is where Dick stopped by on his way to save Danny. However, the exterior looks totally different. But yeah, to be fair, it's been 40 years. Anyway, that ominous opening music begins, and we enter the world of The Shining. We then fly over the island and up the mountain pass, and this scene is identical to the opening of that film. The final chapter title then pops in, with that being called Chapter 6, What Was Forgotten. Now this refers to the line, "You will remember what was forgotten from The Shining," which happens when Tony tells Danny that he will remember his prophetic dreams. Danny then remembered that line in Doctor Sleep, which took us to a chapter titled That Which Was Forgotten. It's here that Danny learns the truth about his father, and that Lucy was the forgotten illegitimate child. We then see as the pair arrive at the Overlook, which is closed and battered by the elements. Now, there was a deleted epilogue for The Shining that showed the manager visiting Wendy in the hospital and saying that nothing which Wendy described was found. Because of this, there were theories for like 40 years that, I don't know, maybe the hotel opened and they just kept on going. But due to the artifacts that we see lying around, it's clear that never happened. Guessing that two murderers living there probably caused some issues. Not having someone in over the window to keep the boiler running though, that meant the hotel was hit with weather problems, so they needed someone on site to save millions in repairs. However, if two of them died, I think they'd be hitting a point of thinking it's not worth it and they probably couldn't get insured. Jack had also been learning about its history, and we do know that it had a checkered past of stop-start openings and closings. So yeah, this all just was way too much and caused it to shut down, and it's now a shadow of its former self. Now, as for the final chapter in the book, though they're on the campgrounds, they take things up to an observation platform where they start astral projecting. But yeah, Flanagan massively improves it for the movie, and we see the place come alive in Danny's presence. He was described as being like a megawatt battery, and it's something that brings it back to life. He then goes back to the boiler room, which is recreated perfectly from The Shining, even down to the picture of the twin babies. He then walks down the infamous hallway where he saw the twins, and goes into the room where his family stayed. He sees the hole his dad made in the door, and then Red Room written under the door in the bathroom. Danny then recreates the most iconic shot in the original movie, and just to make sure the audience remembers, we have Wendy's reactionary shot with Alex Essos. Dan then follows in his father's footsteps and walks towards the gold room. Now there's actually a really nice additional Easter egg here, as we can see the mirror from Flanagan's film Oculus, which I wholeheartedly recommend if you want to see a really good horror film. Definitely cannot recommend this highly enough. Just like Jack, Danny's then offered some booze by the barman, who turns out to be none other than his father. Like Grady, Jack has now become part of the hotel and is the new Lloyd. Now, they obviously didn't get Jack Nicholson back, so they got Henry Thomas instead, who you may recognise from pretty much all of Flanagan's Netflix TV shows, and also E.T., yes, Little Elliot. But yeah, I'm glad that they just recast and didn't do de-aging here. As Rogue One especially, that came out a few years before, and though I enjoyed it at the time, watching it now, I think it looks pretty bad, and I get distracted by the effect.
Slow night, Mr. Torrance.
which is playing off a line that Jack had in the original.
A little slow tonight, isn't it?
The way this whole scene's shot though is simply incredible, with it just being an excellent recreation of the scene from the first film. Jack just plays dumb and says he doesn't recognise Danny, and it's clear that he's just a shell of his former self. He's only there to tempt and do the hotel's bidding and has truly lost everything he was. Jack then says that Danny seems put upon and that men just want to do their work and make 90-minute long YouTube videos. That's the way I want to spend my life. This refers to Jack being obsessed with his writing in The Shining though, and how he ended up hating Wendy for disturbing him. Danny just kind of ignores it and talks about what happened to their life after the hotel to see if there's any interest or recognition.
So we lived in Florida. I'm sorry? Mom and I.
He explains that Wendy couldn't look at him because she kept seeing Jack, and this kind of builds off that scene we saw earlier. He explains that he used his powers so she never saw Jack's eyes in Danny's ever again, and that may have been why he smiled at the mirror. The situation's reversed though, and eventually Danny couldn't look at her when the death flies covered her. So in her final days, she just lay there dying while Danny looked away at something else. She passed away when he was only 20, and losing both at that age makes you really sympathetic to him and does kind of explain why he became an alcoholic.
Don't you want to hear about it? She was your wife.
I think you've mistaken me for someone else.
Jack then offers something warm to help his sadness, and he says,
Your money's no good here. Orders from the house.
Your money's no good here. Orders from the house.
Danny replies saying it will cost him 8 years, which is of course the length of time he's been sober for. Danny then says,
Man takes a drink. The drink takes a drink. And then the drink takes a man.
This is actually an old Irish proverb that talks about the downfall that one has when becoming an alcoholic. It all starts with a choice though, and the man has to choose to be the one to consume it. Eventually though, the drink takes control, and this leads to dependency and ruin. Danny is choosing not to drink it and not playing to the hotel's tricks, so Jack then calls it medicine.
Medicine.
This of course plays into the line that he and his father said, and in case you've forgotten because it's been so long, it's also what Danny said at the start.
So tell me, Bub. Are you gonna take your medicine?
You're gonna take
This scene is all about Danny at the end of his journey though, and finally coming to terms with his trauma. He has turned away from taking that medicine and has now resisted temptation.
The mind is a blackboard. And this is the eraser.
Which is a line that Danny kept thinking in the book. I love this monologue here as well, as Jack justifies the drinking as a method to cope with life. He sees his wife and kid as people who ate up his time, and they were just a hindrance on his life. In reality, he was just an inadequate father, and the booze helped him cope with those clear inadequacies. This made him step away from facing the truth and the fact that he wasn't there in a way that they needed him to be. One thing I didn't actually realise before writing this breakdown is that Mike Flanagan himself was actually in recovery while making this movie. While writing this bar scene, Mike actually realised he needed to get sober, and doing this scene made his attitude towards alcohol change. During production, he then got sober, which is a really interesting story, and you can really tell he put a lot of himself into the movie, much like how King did when he wrote The Shining. Knocking it away, Jack then channels Grady as he apologises for the mess and offers to get him cleared up. The suit completely changes, and we travel to the bathroom, which is shot identically to the scene in The Shining. This wasn't in the theatrical cut, and it's one of those moments I'm like, oh yeah, they did shoot that bit. Like, I'll see on Google, like, you missed this scene in Dr. Seaton. I'm like, I did miss it, mate. I watched the wrong version. Jack then questions why he should be paying Abra's tab, and that he can just bring her inside and let the hotel have their way. Like Grady, he says that the management's concerned and that all they want is the girl. The pair even switch back and forth to highlight how they're jumping back and forth between the decision that Jack made to sacrifice his own child. Danny, of course, ends up being possessed by the hotel as well, so it nicely just foreshadows that eventual moment. This scene is broken up though, as Abra tells him psychically that Rose is arriving. In the book, Danny then used the inhaled steam of the dead grandmother to kill nearly all of the remaining True Knot.
This place is sick. Sick like my mama was sick.
And I did wonder if that line was a carryover from another version where the grandmother was included. They then spot an axe, and Rose arrives and enters the hotel. The Overlook tries to mess with her though, and we see blood from the elevator, albeit at a different angle. To her though, this is like a theme park and she finds the theatrics very entertaining. She then enters the main hall and sees Danny with the iconic axe, which Flanagan apparently got to keep. The typewriter is still there as well, and even the chair's tipped over on the ground. This is some great attention to detail and also shuts down any theories that the Overlook may have reopened. Once again, Obi-Wan has the high ground though, and they both send her to the maze in Danny's mind. It becomes a literal retread of Jack's chase to get Danny where the young lad bested his father. Rose even says, "Where are you, pup?"
Where are you, Pop?
Which is something that Jack also said in that film. Abra has learned some tricks though, as she splits herself in two and cuts Rose multiple times. This kind of plays off The Shining as well, as Danny tricked Jack by making it seem like he went one way when he really went another, and sort of split in two. Reach? In the book, this was actually Danny and Abra punching her one at a time, but I think you're always going to have issues when a guy hits a woman in a movie, so best to avoid it. Like, I even remember when X-Men Apocalypse came out and people were kicking off because the villain choked Mystique. And it's like, it's the villain. But yeah, Abra also says,
"Pain purifies steam. Fear too, so you understand."
Pain purifies steam. Fear too, so you understand.
You might also notice that the weapon's the same here, showing how Abra's adopting the tactics of Rose. Rose is almost locked in a box, but unfortunately she escapes just in time. She then offers Danny a deal after having no idea how they managed to miss him. She says there'll not be any more hangovers, and to be fair, I don't know if I could turn down Rebecca Ferguson, mate. Abra, where are you? Come here. As she goes up the stairs, we also have a repeat of Jack's actions while Danny stands in the place of Wendy.
Eat well. Live long.
Which is the enticement that she used to get Andy to turn. However, he'd just be like one of the ghosts at the Overlook and ultimately trapped like his father. Daddy gets a chop in, but Rose nicks an artery, which is a major change from the book. It puts him on a path towards death and ultimately seals his fate. As he's down, Rose starts to feast on him and she sees memories including lots of things she shot from the previous film. These include Jack chasing Danny, the red room door, staircase, Mrs. Massey and the twins. She then notices he's not alone in his head as Danny releases the ghosts to feast on her. This is kind of similar to something that happens in the book, as there Danny uses Horace Derwin to take out the True Knot. Rose then had a massive fall from the observation tower and then started to cycle, but I do prefer what the film does where we see her being feasted on by the ghost. We even get a top-down shot of them holding her down, which is framed in the same way that the True Knot feast on their victims. So it's a really satisfying end for the villain, and we see that there's nothing left but her hat. The fact that the twins do it as well just nicely plays into how they targeted kids. The two girls then say,
"Hello, Danny. Come and play with us. Forever and ever and ever."
Which is of course a callback to this.
"Hello, Danny. Come and play with us."
Speaking of that scene, we then see as Abra encounters them down the same corridor that Danny did, and it's here that Danny reveals he's been possessed. He chases her just like Jack did, even limping because of his nicked artery, and we see she runs into Derwent and then Grady. This part is inspired by the book, and at one point Rose actually tricks Danny into choking Abra. But for the movie, I do actually prefer the way they do this, and she dashes into room 237, which, as we know, is the heart of the house. It's here that she sees Massey's return, which foreshadows her return later on. It's at this point that Danny then arrives, and Abra calls Danny a false face, which is something Danny called a ghost in the Shining book. His final test is to overcome the hotel's control, and Danny's tricked the hotel into overlooking the boiler room. Stopping the axe, Danny then gets control, and with Abra's help, he's able to loosen its grip. He then tries to go to the boiler room to sort things out, but Danny manages to stay his hand. Steam then fires off, which I did find rather fitting, and eventually this turns into fire. In the blaze, he finally sees his mother's face, and after going back to being a little boy, the pair go to the afterlife. Now, the film does kind of toy with the fact that Danny could have survived, and I have to admit, seeing him in Abra's room, they did get me the first time.
I knew you were okay.
Yeah, you got me, mate. But obviously he's now playing the dick role and visiting Abra as a mentor from the afterlife. The book, though, that has him going 15 years sober, and he warns Abra about the raging alcoholism that runs in their family. Abra even gets drunk at a party when she's older and smashes some plates, which Dan warns her against doing. For the film, though, Abra recites to Ghost Dan how the hotel was screaming, which is similar to how it's described in the Shining book. Danny then tells her to shine on, which is advice that young Danny needed.
Shine on, Abra Stone.
He talks about the dark things that exist in the world, but how someone like her could stand up against them. Lucy then comes in and we realise Dan's a ghost, and she then tells her mother that she wasn't talking to anyone. However, outside she says it's not true and that she was talking to Uncle Dan. She then tells her mother that we go on and that her grandmother and dad's okay before then going off to trap Mrs. Massey. She even says, in a minute, just like Danny, showing that through this trauma, he's mentored someone new. The story has now come full circle and she has moved on from her trauma and won't be haunted by it. To midnight, the stars and you, she closes the door and that puts an end to the film. And I hope you've enjoyed us going back through it. I really enjoyed the movie and I think Flanagan gave us a fantastic sequel that over the years I've just grown to appreciate more and more. You always run the risk of failing massively when the original is such a treasured piece of art, but he really delivered in so many ways, I think. And I hope you've enjoyed us going back to the Overlook, as I really enjoyed going back through these films. Huge shout out to Jared Bauer as well. Definitely go check him out. He does an incredible, much better analysis than me over at his channel. Yeah, and I think he'll really appreciate you watching The Exorcist breakdown and telling him in the comments how great I am. Please drop a like on this video as well and drop a comment with all your thoughts below. If you want to follow us on Instagram and keep up to date with what we're doing, then you can also check us out at Heavy Spoilers. Members of the channel also get early access to videos like this every single week, at least 1 week early, but we're trying to do 2, and we're also trying to do 2 videos a week, but you will get at least 1, and it's just 99 cents a month. And it means that we can do these in-depth breakdowns that revisit classic films and really take our time with them. If not though, thank you so much for sitting through this video. I've been your host Paul as always. You've been the best and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Peace.